Hi, happy St. Patrick's Day to those of you who are celebrating. If you don't remember whether or not you're celebrating, you probably are. You've been listening to the Irish Reel by Benjamin Britten. This particular version is published by Faber Music and engraved by copying superhero Elaine Gould. Please type in your names and where you're from in the chat room. If you're so inclined, turn on your camera. Hang on, got to get my script back. There it is. Turn on your camera for a few minutes and wave hi, especially you St. Patrick's Day celebrators. We want to say thank you for your past donations and to our fellow ASMAC members for your continued support. Your support helps us present media events like this one and other great ASMAC endeavors. It's now time for me to introduce the president of ASMAC and one of the world's premier harpists and one of the nicest people you ever met in your life, Ms. Gayle Levant.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, I'm sitting here, I can't believe how many countries have joined us today, and I'm trying to jot them down as quickly as I can because I love to read it to you because I think it's just fantastic. Anyway, so happy St. Patrick's Day. And you know what? I forgot to wear green. I better go get a dollar bill or something and put it on. Okay, so on behalf of ASMAC, it's my pleasure to welcome all of you around the world who are joining us for another wonderful event. And we want to welcome our friends from our sister organizations, the AWFC, SCL, ASA, Meister Music, Nakusa, Muse, and the Los Angeles Inception Orchestra. So, before we go any further, I just have to read these countries that have joined us today. I haven't even counted them. Different areas, I should say, around the world. We have Geneva, we have Portugal, Estonia, Poland, South Africa, Berlin, Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, Sweden, Germany, Scotland, Finland, the UK, Buenos Aires, North Wales, Singapore, Puerto Rico. Did I say Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil, Australia, Canada, Mexico, Dublin, Hamburg, Stockholm, Romania, Czech Republic, Denmark, Norway. Anyway, this just absolutely takes my breath away. So I welcome all of you for another wonderful, wonderful event. Reading music parts on sessions that are clearly notated results in the best possible performance of your work from all of us. So please enjoy today's webinar. I know you'll learn a lot. It's my pleasure to introduce live from New York, music copyist, arranger, and leader of the hippie big band, Russ Anixter, who will then introduce himself to all of you and then introduce the rest of the panel. So without any further ado, Russ, I'm turning it over to you. Have a wonderful event. I'll be here. I'll be watching the chat. We'll all be watching the chat to get your questions up. Also, I just noticed that we've got Ireland and Greece. Oh my God, this is just amazing. Thank you guys for being with us, and girls, everybody. Belgium.
Gayle, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, as the case may be. Hello from New York. I'm actually on Staten Island, which still counts as New York City. I have an office in Midtown that I will pretty soon be able to go to. I just want to start out by with something really quick. One of my composition teachers told me that your music manuscript that you put on your stand is like your business card to the orchestra. It's your first impression. If they don't know you, this is their introduction to you. So what you put out there is very important. And I'm going to leave that as a starting point for today. I would like to introduce our panel, and then we'll get to our special guest. First from the UK, Jill Streater, who Jill was actually able to procure our guest for us, so thank you, Jill. Also from the West Coast is Russ deRoche. And from New York, my friend from across Times Square, Emily Grishman. You know, I haven't seen you this much, Emily, since, you know, I've seen you more on Zoom than I had in real life before a year ago. And from Los Angeles, Liz Finch, who will introduce our special guest. There you go, Liz.
Wow, everyone, thank you for coming today. I welcome you, and I'm so thrilled that we have so many people joining us today, because we have the author of the definitive guide to music notation, Elaine Gould. Her book, oops, I'm going to take this out. Her book, which some of you have seen and some of you have and some of you haven't, I like to show this way, but I also like to show it this way, to give you an idea of how comprehensive it is. It's nearly 700 pages long, and it has all the information that you, as a performer, as a composer, as an orchestrator, as a copyist, whatever you may be doing, you need to know what's in this book. And her book is the first book of this kind in over 50 years. We've been using the Gardner Reed book that's also very comprehensive and thick. We've been using that for many years, and Elaine has taken this a step further, has updated us all with the things that are going on in the 20th century, the 21st century, and she's provided us with rules, recommendations, and solutions to facilitate the communication we all need for our music to those performers. I have to tell you that we have two things I'm sharing with you from the book today. One is her introduction to the book. If you don't have the book, at least read the introduction that we're going to put. I think, Milton, we're going to put it in the chat room for everyone. I'm sorry, it's kind of a quick scan of the first pages of her book, but it's a wonderful introduction. It's a wonderful statement as to why she did this and other questions that she will answer and tell us about today. But the other thing, Elaine doesn't know I'm going to do this, but there's a statement from Sir Simon Rattle at the beginning of this book that, you know, it's a type of a dedication, I suppose. And he goes on about what a wonderful contribution this is. But my favorite sentence in it is this, that he wrote. He says, "It is an extraordinary achievement, and if used by the next generation of composers and copyists, will be a blessing for hardworking and long-suffering performers." So I thought that was interesting, that those performers are all long-suffering out there. So we need to know that, and we need to keep our, do the best we can with the skills that we have. So it's my pleasure to introduce Elaine to you now, and she has a lot to tell us.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Liz. That's fantastic. And it's a huge pleasure to be here talking to you all. I'm amidst a fraternity of musicians with a lifelong passion for putting top quality music on the stand. I know that from those of you who I've already talked to, and an audience with a lifelong passion for notation, like me, I'm sure. So it's a huge pleasure for me to be asked to talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I came to be interested in notation in the first place, and a little bit of background to how I came to even think about writing this book. And then there are some questions which some of the committee might ask, and you're, I think, able to type your questions in as well, and we'll field, Emily or Liz will field some of those as we go along too. I suspect I may well even answer some of those while I go along, things that you're thinking of. So I've got some slides, as it were, scans and photos to show my young journey into notation, which I will hopefully be able to share with you. So I'm talking to you here from the east of England, from Suffolk, near the east coast, and pretty close to where Benjamin Britten spent his entire life. And as a child, Benjamin Britten was someone one bumped into while holidaying in Aldeburgh, walking down the high street. But he was also pretty much of a god from an early age for me. My mother was a musician, and she would point him out when we were up in Aldborough, and I loved his music from an early age. I played in the Suffolk Schools Orchestra, and Britain was commissioned to celebrate the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977. In that last photo, she was actually opening the Snape Maltings, which Britain had built for the expanding Aldborough Festival. And that was a big deal for people in Suffolk, that suddenly there was a huge hall where you could have a proper symphony orchestra. A lot more music was coming into the area, and it was very exciting being part of this premiere. Unfortunately, Britain died just after he was commissioned to write it, but the premiere was in 1977, and Colin Matthews was working as a young composer, as an assistant to Britain. He was working with him, and he orchestrated this piece so that we could play it. So this is a little did I know at the time that 15 years later I would actually be editing a new edition of this piece, the Welcome Ode for Faber Music. But at the time, it was very intriguing, because this young composer, Colin Matthews, came along to our rehearsal when we were rehearsing for this big event with the Queen coming to Ipswich, and he explained to us that he'd been working with Britain, and he'd copied out the score to Britain's instructions, that Britain hadn't been well enough to orchestrate the piece himself, and Colin had done all the orchestral parts as well as the full score. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a really interesting job, working with composers. Yeah, I think that's something I would be really interested to do. And this is Colin's hand. Colin has a beautiful hand. So we were reading off these hand copied parts, probably for a lot of us for the first time, actually. And it wasn't that hard to read. It was different. But Colin has always had a beautiful autograph hand. We've actually published, he's a Faber published composer. We've published some of his scores in autograph manuscript, as it were, because they are so lovely. So this was my first introduction really to what there might be behind the scenes, that music didn't just automatically appear on the stand. There were people there that doing things. So that was intriguing to me. Incidentally, in that orchestra, playing in that concert, I have the program, so I could see were in the string section, there were an extraordinary number of talented musicians, as they were later. The composer David Saw who's published by Universal Edition, was in the first violins, and in the viola was Jocelyn Pook, the film composer, and also in that viola section was Jeremy Allen, who is a senior editor at Boozy and Hawkes. We were actually brought up in the same village in Suffolk as well, by extraordinary coincidence. So I went to university at Birmingham to study music, and was interested in composing and what composers did. And when I finished there, I thought, right, okay, how can I work with composers? So came down to London and thought, okay, can I set myself up as a copyist? Wrote around to see if I could get work. And by another extraordinary coincidence, as it now seems today, my father happened to know Anne Barnard's father, and I got a phone number and I got to ring her to ask some advice about how you became a hand copyist. So that was before I started, and Anne was really kind and gave me some advice, as far as I remember, about what pens to get, what paper to get. So I got a few things and set off in search of a publisher to give me work. While I had been at college, before I went to university, another skill I developed and which I adored was calligraphy. And this is the work of a calligraphy teacher who lived down the road in Suffolk from me. And the first time I went to her house, she happened to be copying the peerage scroll when Benjamin Britten was given a life peerage just before he died in 1976. And her work was actually there on a huge piece of vellum, calfskin, about A1 size, a huge document, which everyone who's going to go into the UK House of Lords gets one of these fantastic scrolls. You will see that in the bottom of there is the kind of thing that she did with this wonderful scroll that you got, this very elaborate calligraphic work, which taught me a lot about precision, how to do things really well. And she taught me standards of excellence. She had been taught in a line of calligraphers back to Edward Johnston, who had studied with William Morris, a long line of English and British craftsmen. And so she instilled those standards in me about writing. So I had the love of writing and I had the love of music. So it was a kind of obvious leap to try to see if I could combine both in copying. So I found work in London. The two composers that I'd studied with at Birmingham were both published composers. So I ended up working for them and for their publishers. John Caskin is with Shot. I copied a lot of his pieces, and John Joubert was with Novellos, and I ended up doing a lot of work with them. Piano reductions, working with Thea Musgrave on her operas, which was really nice. And also then going into more detailed graphic scores. If you want to whiz through the next 3 slides. This is one of the early works I did, Jonathan Harvey, electronics, and a tape part there, which was fun to copy. And again, was using, this was all done on transparency, the onion skins on huge paper. And the great skill of trying to do that was that you had to, like the traditional engravers, you had to use your real skills to do a cast off, work out how many staves you needed for each page that was coming along, because you had the different paper pre-printed at 25, 30 staves, 36 staves and so on. So you had to work out in advance and not use the 50 stave paper if you didn't need it. So that was a very good training, and something that you do in publishing, working out those very precise parameters before you get to the layout. Another example of that. Jonathan Harvey had, by the time I was copying that piece, moved from Novello to Faber, and he introduced me to the production department and the editors there, and said, oh, you might like to do some more of my pieces. So this is the first piece that I copied for Faber. I didn't actually even know they were going to publish it. It was just recopying a cello piece that he had written. If you want to move on, next 2 pages show the copying, where here I ruled all the stave lines by hand. I got some totally blank onion skins and ruled my own lines, because as we all know, pre-printed paper is really tricky if you've got anything complicated, where you've got the staves set close together, and there isn't room when you suddenly need to do all these extra things. So nice graphics to do, which I found as a calligrapher great fun to do all of that with Jonathan's extended techniques. And I enjoyed doing that. And that was really the first piece of Jonathan's, well, the second piece that I copied of his. And I then have been editing his works ever since, really, and working out how to most efficiently notate his extended techniques and so on. And so that was a fun journey, working with Jonathan, who was always open to ideas about how to notate things. And we used to have a lot of conversations about that. So for Faber, I was doing all sorts of pieces, and this piece of Nick Moore's, he wrote a series of piano pieces which are incredibly difficult to play, and quite often you've got 6-note chords in each hand, and you've got massive chords here, And I rung up Faber and said, well, what order do you want all these accidentals in on 6-note chords? Do you want to follow the principle of aligning octaves, or fitting in accidentals as close to the notes as you can? And there was just a dead silence at the other end. Yeah, do what you think is, looks best. So I thought, okay, that's when I started looking at my notation books and thinking, all the answers I want, they're not here. So I started going and looking at scores and trying to find examples of what I wanted, and thinking, yeah, someone needs to probably develop some more rules on this. I can't find what I need. So 7 years I was doing hand copying, and then Faber needed another editor. They hadn't really got anyone just doing the contemporary music side at that time. So I was brought in 1987 to sort a few things out. Really get parts copied, get scores in a better state. Things were in a bit of a dire state, principally because there've been a lot of composers writing pieces at last minute. So a lot of materials were half finished or not properly prepared, and quite honestly, some of the standards were a bit shocking. This is one of the last pieces that I copied before I started at Faber, a piece of Colin Matthews, where I think we had some specially printed paper where the staves were further apart so that there was room for writing a huge amount on a page, getting in lots of cues, getting in all the information. And I think there was a problem with page turns on this piece because it goes hell for leather, 15 minutes. So you needed not just 10 staves, you needed more to be able to do that. That's another page of this, showing cues over the page turn, sensible things. I was already working out then what was sensible. Some rest at the end of a line, some at the beginning, but always cues over the page where you're actually going to be able to see them. And of course, working at Faber, I started to be able to see players' comments, the materials we had there, and what was going to be starting to learn about what was the real stuff that I hadn't read in books, what was going to be useful for players to have, and how to lay out things on the part, so that you were getting the best from the players. I was beginning to realise that actually some of this was going to be needing to be written down. I was forever writing style sheets. So here we have it. I was commissioned by our commissioning editor in 1990. There was a new exam syllabus for 16-year-olds doing music in the GCSEs, or the education system was revamped for that. And Faber were thinking, right, what can we publish that will go along with that? And Elaine, how would you like to write a music notation for beginners? So here is page 1 of that very document. So I said, okay, right, I'll have a go at that. That title lasted approximately a week, I think. I wrote a few chapters, so the basics of the notation. And then I thought, hold on, I don't know about education really. I've never been a teacher. I don't really know about what's needed for this level, and there's an awful lot more to say than what I would really want to say for that. But please, may I write down everything I know, which was a bit of a fatal thing to say, because of course I discovered as I started writing that I didn't actually know as much as I thought, and I said, right, okay, can I write something that really will be quite big? There's a gap in the market. There's not been a book published for a long time. I love the Kurtzstone book. I've been using the Gardner-Reed book. They are great models, but they don't have everything in that I need, and I can't find things in the Gardner-Reed book fast enough. And I'm impatient when I'm working. I want to find an answer quickly. That was my rationale for, right, that's what I want to do, to get those 2 books, to get the information that's in those 2 books together, and to have things that are there as a working manual for us all, for myself, for my team, especially, to have the answers there. So I wrote one draft after another, and after about 6 years, I had a full draft there in the form that I wanted, and it went to 3 different readers. I went to a really eminent teacher, composer, and conductor for their comments, people who I knew were incredibly practical and incredibly exacting, and they read it all through, and as did my editor at the time. And after a year, the editor came back and we looked at the structure, we looked at all the comments, and we slightly restructured some of the book. What had happened is the choice of what do you put in the book. Once you've got the general principles there, what do you put in when it comes to your orchestral instruments, and how much do you say about them, and how far do you encroach into the business of orchestration, and what you should use and how should you write it. And if you recommend something, or if you notate it, does it mean that you're recommending that someone uses it, and so on. So I found that, especially in an instrument like the harp, where you actually need to describe what a technique is in order to say what the notation is, that it was becoming a bit like a manual for harp. So we cut down a little bit of that, and I left that information there in other books where people could find those in other manuals. But I basically then refined things down, but generally added a lot more things in there. You want to move on to just flick through the next couple of. So at the beginning, the very first draft, the idea was that the examples would be hand copied and then hand photographed into the book, because it was at that time Sibelius really was only just getting going. We didn't know if we could rely on it to produce decent examples. So that was the idea. So this is a page from the parts queuing where I was just going to be writing all of this by hand. This is a page showing the comments from readers, and particularly Colin Matthews, who's always been passionate about notation. So he was going to be a great critique. So he says at the top, yeah, there are other ways of doing this. And he, everywhere where I'd written something, he said, you mustn't sit on the fence. Which way do you want to recommend people do something? And I realized, of course, yes, you want to refer to this book, you want an answer, but at the same time, I also wanted to make sure that if there were different options, people could see what the options were. So I would want to take what had been done traditionally, or the various ways that things have been handled in the past, give people the option of using them, but to give a context for each of those. So that's what my readers had picked up about that I should focus in very carefully, so that everyone could have an answer. And this is showing a bit of restructuring, where I was very, very keen that each chapter should have a logical structure through it. So if you really wanted to, you could start from the position of the sort of most straightforward example of something, and then work with adding other contexts and reaching out from that. Of course, there were different ways of doing that, but I was kind of quite pleased to find that settled down quite early, that structure of reaching out from the basics, so that if you're flicking through, you can sort of find something without having to go to the index. And so while editors were reading the next draft all the time, I was carrying on researching as much as I could. And here I am working with my nephew's string quartet, working on some Tom Addis. I mean, actually, this photograph was taken a bit later, but it was to make it is really there to remind everybody that the greatest teachers in everything you're doing are your musicians, who are your customers, as it were. who are playing your pieces and your conductors, anyone who's using whatever you produce, is to ask them what they want, and learn from them all the time. And that's what I hope I carry on doing, that, and never assume I know exactly what they want without asking them. There's a couple of pages here where we started putting the music examples onto Sibelius, and they went onto the Acorn because at the time the PC version was very much in its infancy, and we weren't sure how that was going to develop, and we really liked the look. I loved the look of the Acorn and the fonts and so on, and so the music examples, like the text, went through loads and loads of proof stages. And the most difficult thing with Sibelius was to get an example looking really bad when I wanted it to look very poorly spaced. That was quite difficult. So I would be rewriting examples on proof, either so that they fitted neatly on one line, or so that encouraging the spacing either to look worse or to look more tight, or whatever it is I wanted to do. So there was masses and masses of minute tweaking all along the way. I had a very patient typesetter who did all this, and more of the same, really. Just tweaking lots of spacing all the time to make a point, really, so that I'm trying to train whoever's looking at it. You're training the eye all the time to appreciate very fine spacing and why something looks good and why something doesn't. And these are some my beautiful proofs where I pasted up all my music examples back into my text. Once the copy was pretty much ready, it went through a couple of editors, read it, and it was copy edited as well. And then the pages were marked up for the typesetter, and they were marked up for the text typesetter as well. So there were a lot of people helping, looking through everything, and my colleagues as well, who got to read final proofs for me, so that I could really keep everything watertight and make sure things made sense. Next, if you want to just flick through the next couple of pages, similar things, lots of rewrites, getting rid of we kept keeping bullet points, but getting rid of, I wanted everything to be in lists, very easy to read. Some of the lists came out, some of the examples came out if they were a bit long or shortened up, all that sort of thing. And we had a bit of discussion about the title, and one or two people at Favour were adamant that the book should definitely be called, as all research tells you, apparently all books are supposed to be called exactly what they are and when they're reference books, and it's apparently an absolute disaster to call them anything else. And I was sort of saying, well, over my dead body, is it called something really, really boring? So I did say, well, okay, have a go, and no one will ever remember it if it's called notating music, and it's not going to make the slightest difference to sales, whatever you call it. People either want this or they don't. That was an initial idea. Then it was my brother who was typing my early proofs for me, because I wrote everything by hand, and he was always putting in the odd joke or pun in the book, and he came up with this title, Behind Bars, and it stuck, really. And one or two people were not at all keen on it, so I said, well, okay, if you can find something better, that is completely fine. And they didn't, so it did stick. And okay, it's a groany pun, but it's the only joke you're going to get in the book, so, and you're going to remember it, that's the point. So that's how it came about. Then I proposed a cover design as well. That was my initial idea for a cover design, which I then briefed in-house cover design, and then she worked on that idea, and then she evolved the cover to what it is now, and we chose the typefaces and everything. That was the brilliant luck for me to be working in-house at Faber, and to have this great team of designers around me. So, and I mean, it meant I could interfere and drive everybody mad, but it also meant I could get exactly what I wanted, and which was great, working with everybody. So these are, so having marked up all of the previous proofs, our absolutely fabulous book designer, Jill Burrows, was then tasked to set the text and then to drop in the music examples. And here is some examples of the first. Again, these went through 3 or 4 stages to get everything right. She had to drop the music examples in, and she couldn't really see. They were in a box. They were in a black box. She couldn't see them at all. It was very tricky to arrange them precisely right on the page. So all the spacing around all the headings, and she evolved the series of title, the design of the weights between the different titlings and everything to make that easiest to read. And she came up with this beautiful design and this absolutely wonderful spacing. And she put in 101% effort all the time, and lots of extra time to make everything just so on the page, to the point where we were going along matching pages and to check that they were exactly the same page length. I was adding, as here, I was adding some extra text, adding some extra page references at the bottom of this page to fill out the page. You will see again, we had a short page because there was a large music example coming after this text. So I would occasionally think, okay, let's, my editor said, okay, think of something, if you want to have an extra paragraph in so that it fills out that page a bit more. Because Jill was terribly careful, and you will find this when you open it up. When there's a leading sentence to a music example, the music example, you never have to flick over a page to find the music example. Occasionally there's one across a facing page, but she always made sure that your text that accompanied the music example was on the same page. So for instance, you'll see in the next 2 slides that in the piano chapter, I have 4 examples of a passage which it's the same passage, and you can write it in 4 different ways. Well, in the original design, this was page 7 of that chapter, so it was a right-hand page, and the 4th example was over the page. So I said, okay, so I marked it up and said, right, can we please have all these on a double page? And that didn't work with how the pagination was going out. So I moved a section later, which didn't matter that it came before this. I moved that earlier, talking about something else, so that this would then fit, so that we could have, and you'll see in the book that these 4 examples are now matching pages, because I was absolutely adamant that they had to be, you have to see them together. That's the whole point. Even if you can't be bothered to read the text, you can see just by looking at them what the differences are and the impact of making different decisions editorially about how something is laid out. So that was, Jill took a lot of care on that, and I have to say, when I open up the book now, I really appreciate that behind the scenes design work that she did there. So I've got a series here which you could of this was the best day of my life, probably. Most exciting day was going down to Cornwall, to Padstow, to see the I asked the printer if I could go down and see it running off the press. So here we are at TJ International, and because the printing is litho, you will see that first slide, that is the whole of the book, which takes up that enormous amount of space before it's all sewn together. And this is the covers, that's 2,000 covers there on a pallet, waiting to be put on. So next slide. And these are the sections of the book is printed in these sections, and they have to, the ink has to settle for 3 or 4 days before you can clamp the book together, or else you get the ink coming off on the other pages. And then these sections are put up on this conveyor belt, and there's a lady here who's just about to start that, and that in front of you is 3 sections of the book, and there are about 6 sections, so you can see how big it looks when it's before it's all clamped together. And then she presses the button and off it went down the conveyor belt slide. After it's glued, it has to go down a conveyor belt. So there has to be a certain number of seconds that the glue dries, and then it goes into the next machine to be guillotined, for the edges to be guillotined, and then the glue dries for a certain length of time before it goes into the machine that sews the sections together. So those are those 2 sections. And then I looked round and I saw the real thing coming off once the cover had gone on, and that was amazing. Things suddenly became real. And after that, it goes in a separate jacket machine, which is all very Heath Robinson-like. Comes off one conveyor belt, goes on another, and then the jacket goes on, and then it comes out the other end. So there's one more slide showing there we are, coming off with its jacket on. So that was a fairly amazing moment to see that, see how big and solid it felt. And then the next slide showing, and then it arrives in the office, and there's our production department inspecting it to see whether they think it looks okay. So that was a very exciting moment indeed. And with the lovely grey end papers that I'd chosen, and the end bands in blue and white, and all those little touches that you can have on a hardback, which was a great treat and a massive luxury to have. And the lovely cream paper that we'd chosen with very little show through, and I had lots of discussion with the printers about that, and actually offered to pay extra if we needed it, just so that you had a book that when you buy it, it's just going to last you a lifetime. It's not going to fall apart. It's going to be there, and it's never going to rot, hopefully. So that was very, very pleasing. After that, oh yes, very, very thrilling for me to see that. First of all, in the Chimes music shop in South Kensington, began to feel rather real to see it there. Then 2014, Peter's Edition decided they wanted to collaborate with us on a German edition, which was fantastic news. And this is Halt über Kopf. So that's another pun in German, which means neck over head, as in falling in love, sort of head over heels kind of thing, which apparently they thought was quite amusing. So they wanted to have that. And that is Jens Berger on the left, who's a musician and translator, and Arne Muss, who was at college with Jens, another musician who is now general manager at Peter's Edition. And both of them worked incredibly hard on the translation, and I think they've done a really fantastic job. And since then, Anna and I have been to Germany doing some talks and lectures at various universities. So if you show the last 2 slides, that will just give you a context. There we were in Frankfurt, the music fair, advertising the book, and then the last slide shows our first presentation in Leipzig, where Peter's Edition had just moved back to in the Hinrichsen archive in the National State Library of Leipzig, and this is a very sad. I mean, this is a very sad place, really, because this is where Hinrichsen and most of his family were exterminated during the war. But he left this amazing archive, which is housed there. So this was a really wonderful place to be able to present the Halt über Kopf to the world. and there was a lot of interest there, which was really great. So that's the kind of story of where we were, where we are. There's a Chinese edition is in production. It's not yet finished, but we look forward to seeing that at some point in the future. And there have been interests from a couple of academics in another couple of Asian countries as well, who are, I think, very keen to translate it into South Korean, certainly to Korean. So that would be interesting too. So thank you. That's the background that I have on that.
Thank you, Elaine. What you can't see in the chat was the explanation of the pun in German.
Ah,
That was going on simultaneously there.
right. Okay. Well, hopefully you've got some German speakers who can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't expecting to see the book factory. That was fascinating.
Well, of course, most of us don't get a chance to see, and even I, that was not. It's only about the second time I've ever been to a printer. I've been to Halston. We have a couple of printers only who print music now in the UK, and that's it. That's interesting. But just for a book, these publishers, these printers are used by Faber and Faber, for their big books, which is why we got a good deal on the printing, because of course they're expensive to produce, but they've got all this wonderful kit, and it was very exciting. They were really excited too. One of them happened to be the lady who was in charge of product control. It was a flautist. So she came out. It was like a big day for them as well. They were all coming out, and they were all very, very excited. And they were determined it was all going to work and come off the machine really quickly. And the whole thing was printed in about 2 hours, which they said was a really, really long time for them, because most of their books weren't as long as that. But it's the setup time, getting all these machines set up, and then once it started, that the whole thing is done in about 5 minutes or less for the first few copies. So it was incredible.
You gave us the heart and the soul of the book, and those pictures gave us the backbone and the skeleton. It was wonderful. I know Emily and Liz have some questions prepared for you, but I just want to get one from the chat. How many were printed in that first run? 2,000
copies.
Okay.
And basically we tend to reprint in quantities of about, it's mostly the reprints have been 2,000 copies, but that's a decision about how many copies you want to have to house in your warehouse. In other words, how quickly are they going to shift? Because of course this takes up quite a lot of room. So you don't want to print for too long. It's to do with warehouse space. But if I say we're on we have reprinted for the 9th time, so we're on the 10th impression now. So yeah, we've been keeping our printers in business every year with us for a bit, so which is great. And most of the 60%, 70% of copies are going to the US now. That's our biggest market. It's overtaken the rest of the world in the last couple of years. So yeah, there's a lot of you over there buying copies, which is great.
So we have some questions prepared. Emily, you want to go first, or Liz, or?
I think Emily's got a question she's gonna ask, right?
Well, I mean, we had a few questions that we had thought about, and we have more people probably on this call who consider themselves copyists and not engravers. Okay, and I think that it would be worth hearing from you what the difference is between a copyist and an engraver, especially since we're all using computer programs now. So people say, oh, well, I'm an engraver. And I think that that I know from my work, it's very different. The standards that I use are most definitely different from the standards that Faber would use for an edition. And it would be interesting to hear from you just exactly what leeway, what's the leeway, and what are absolutely rigorous rules that we must adhere to versus well, just the talk about copying versus engraving. That's
Yeah.
kind of the
So
general question.
by copying, are you meaning producing music for commercial purposes?
Exactly. Let's talk.
Yeah,
Yeah. So let's
yeah.
say commercial.
As a,
I do theater. I do theater
yeah,
music
yeah,
mostly.
yeah,
I do
yeah,
everything. Theater
yeah,
is my bailiwick,
yeah.
and then on the West Coast, I mean, Liz and the rest are often, and
Yes,
Jill,
exactly. As opposed to concert music.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah. In other words, from the last 3 webinars that I've listened to on your music prep, I'm getting the impression that things are still the same. Things are still done in a massive hurry, in a massive rush, and that therefore the circumstances that you're doing things are different. Okay, we have the concert music scene. Composers and deadlines are legendarily never kept, but the time frame is nothing like the huge pressures that you have to do things right now, and neither could we, because the music is often much more complex. It can be because there's more time to do it, but yeah, I was thinking about this, and I mean there's a lot of there are a lot of similarities between what we all do, and I think I thought, well, we're two sides of the same coin. We both need that same skill set, where you have to train your eye, you have to appreciate good spacing. It can be different, it's maybe different results, but you still need to have that, because you mustn't put off the person reading it. It's got to be right. So, and I think we all think that the best way for doing that is to have started with pen and ink, and to have trained your eye from having to do the spacing yourself and having looked along a whole line, worked out things in advance, and certainly never assuming that a computer can do that correctly for you first time round. We've all realized that we learn a lot of that from used parts, from looking at musicians' comments, from learning from them, and from using our knowledge as a musician to be practical, to understand why page turns are important, and also how to edit parts and scores as we go, that we need to intervene with our skills when we know there are obvious mistakes, and to use that knowledge and not just say, oh, well, like the composer wants to do something very odd here, but to either raise it or to correct it. And with orchestration as well, when there are things missing, and when there are things patently wrong, or range is wrong, or something has gone wrong, we know that's the same for everyone. We want that to happen. We also, I think it's the same, that we all the best training is on the job, is that we all learn by doing it, when we're out there on the jobs. We all know the value of checking and proofing work, which is what you were talking about in one of your other sessions. And it's true that, as you said, that rush jobs are always defined as the better you do, the less time you have to do them the next time. So it's kind of the same. It's the same in the world now. Now that computers come, it's exactly the same. That everyone says, well, okay, I hear that so and so's finished their score yesterday. Can you put the part in the post today? Right. Okay. Yeah. No recognition that you, as the producer of the music, as the editor, as the copyist, as the typesetter, whatever process you call that, that no recognition that you are intervening to save the composer from themselves or whatever you're doing. You're helping the process along. You are actually making something possible. It's not, you're not doing that automatic press of a button stuff. And that our aim is the same, to produce materials fit for purpose. We've got the same concern that our players want the clearest parts. The conductor wants the score that's legible, that the page turns work, that it's not noisy in a recording session, The practical things, we haven't got white shiny paper in a pit that you can't read. The things are the same because basically musicians are playing it there, so they are the same. For them, it's the same whatever they're doing. And to be honest, in the concert world, it's got to be clear because most of the orchestras now have very little rehearsal time, far less than they used to, certainly in the UK. And they've got to do things quickly, and they've got to be able to do things first time round. So many things are just recorded or workshopped in exactly the same way that your musicians are having to learn things, do it right there and there. Of course, the differences are in the conditions that the music is played under, and that the time that you have, and that you would probably love your stuff. Just have lots of time to think about how you lay out things, but you don't have that time, and that's why you have your set formulae. That your expectations that you will write 4 bars on a line most of the time, or in phrase length, and your musicians know that, and so they've already read it. They've visualized it before they've even read it, and that helps. That I now understand why you do that because of that, and they understand that, and that's the big difference. My music is coming from a sort of point of, well, I'm thinking in my head of beautiful editions from the past, where the engravers who were engraving on lead plates or manuscript paper, which was very, very precious, they were cramming as much music as they could on one page, so that they could read it, or because it was on a small stand, or there was only a certain number of plates available, and therefore you're compressing it more, so that basically now we have a bit more. I have a sort of middle ground between that and between spacing it out too widely, so that you aim for this even spread across the page, and I get completely obsessed with spacing, because as I'm saying all the time, musicians read all the time by spacing. So you have your spacing, which has to be even within the parameters that you set. And again, I might have all sorts of odd bar lengths on a line. The music might be in all sorts of different time signatures. There might be nothing even at all about in anything in terms of its length. But you've got to make sure that runs fluently across a page in order that it can be read. And you mustn't have things that are wildly out of proportion to each other, or you simply put the musicians off, because that's what they're used to. They can compensate to a certain extent, but you don't want to make them stumble in a piece. It's just not fair to do that. One other difference, actually, certainly in parts, is because our music is often, the idiom might be totally unfamiliar to people. They don't, when a composer writes a new piece, may have no idea what kind of sound world to expect. Is that when we do parts where there's a lot of people are not playing a lot of the time, then you have masses and masses of cues, of entry cues. And that's something that is a real skill to learn how to do, because you've got to really learn the score and understand how the conductor is going to bring people in, how he's going to play it, all sorts of things that you might need to know. And that's something that you don't have the time to do that, or if your music, it's a kind of different context.
Well, in response to that, 2 things struck me just now. That was an amazing, amazing dissertation of an answer to that question. It's fantastic distillation, I should say, of all the points, and well taken. But one of the things you talked about spacing, and our tendency in commercial music to stick to the phrasing more so than the spacing you might do that's optimal for publication, is that for film, and especially for theater, we have to account for making quick changes on the stand. So if I put a 4-bar big block rest across an entire system, it's not because I want to make it's not for no other reason other than tomorrow the composer could want that trumpet player to play 4 bars of busy material right there, and I can be right in the pit, or the trumpet player can lean forward with a pencil and write directly onto that part without having to go back to the drawing board. So we have the practical consideration when you're dealing with publishing, printing, distribution of music that is concert music. That has already been determined. That's not getting changed on the stand tomorrow, most of the time. Most of the time. Yeah, no,
Yes.
I'm hearing
Yeah.
myself say that, and I'm kind of backtracking. But further to that, cues, we think differently of cues because, well, in concert music, you could have a timpanist who's out for 67 bars and then plays a note. In theater music, less so. We have shorter song cues, but also my famous thing that I always say is that I'm looking at a score and I want to drop in this perfect trumpet cue. It's loud, everyone's going to hear it. It's 4 bars and there's a great, and it's a great cue for everyone. So I put it in all the parts, and then we go to that first band rehearsal and the piece is played, and that 4 bars is just too much for the moment, and it's tacited on day 1. And now there's a legacy of that thing lurking in every part for eternity, so we try to be very judicious in theater music and also in film, I suppose. Film music has probably fewer cues than written music cues, but in theater, when we put a musical cue in with notes, it has to be well thought out because the tacit situation is just too common. And I like to use, so therefore we do something that you would rarely do in published music. I'll use just a word cue. I'll say trumpet entry, trumpet parentheses. And that way, if it goes away, everybody takes a strike out with the pencil, 1 line, it's neat, it doesn't destroy the entire universe. And we can use, so word cues for commercial music in English, very common and very useful, more so than labeling a part with a bunch of musical cues that are hard to track down and that could be gone on the first hearing. So those are two distinct things that you mentioned that are really very different between our two crafts, I should say.
Yeah, I like using the entry labels too of instrument entries. Especially in music.
Did
if
you
you've
do
not,
that?
yeah.
In your published music?
Yeah, because sometimes you may just have a single note that's coming in. A lot of music now has sort of virtually no melodic context in content. It might just be texture. You might have a whole stream of microtonal textures building up, for instance. Well, what do you cue? That's the whole thing. What do you cue? So if you've just got one percussion instrument or something that's coming in at a particular point, that might be the most audible thing. So you might well, when you're cueing it, it can be really difficult to work out what you're going to hear.
Right.
So at that point, I'd go back to the composer and ask them if I need to. I think, well, actually, they need to work out what it is that how this piece is going to work and who's going to hear what. If in doubt, go back to your composer.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of composers, can I bring up my question? Elaine, yesterday first of all, you just said a little earlier that you were saving the composers from themselves. And we all giggled, of course. But what are your thoughts on the composers and arrangers becoming their own copyists or engravers when then they have to produce their own scores and parts? Is the extra control on their own notation better for the final product?
Yeah, well, this is a really great question, and as sitting as I am sometimes in my office with my fellow 2 editors, composers, of course, are passionate about what they write on the page, and everything they write on the page, they also think that they want us to put in their parts. And sometimes you don't want to do all of that. Sometimes they write a lot of what they hear, or the result of what they've written, the result of the action that they've asked for. So they write a note and they and it's on a percussion instrument that's going to resonate for ages, and you know, a tam tam or something, or a tubular bell, for instance, and they want to write little open ties and laissez vibrer after every single one of these. So they write a scale of tubular bell notes or crotiles or something, and they write these little ties and little LV signs on every single one of them. And then they want us to do the same. And I'm saying, well, actually, that may look very beautiful in the score, but we don't really need all of this. You can put, you know, let ring always, LV sempre at the start, or just put don't damp anything. We can put something and then we can leave the notation to be clean. Your piece has got, may have a lot of complicated rhythms. There might be a lot on the page already. In every bar, there might be just loads of things. It looks very beautiful to have tons and tons of extra symbols and looks very complicated, and you're creating a beautiful work of art, but this is going on the stand for a percussionist who is doing loads of other things as well as looking at their music, and we need to take some of these things out. So I quite often have a debate with composers about this, and they'll say, oh, but so and so, I went to this orchestra and they complimented me on the fact that it was very reassuring to have everything written in as they had to play it, and every piece of pedaling that they needed to know was in the vibraphone part, rather than just putting comped, or instead you could put, you know, ped every chord, that everything was all written in, and they said that was really, really reassuring. Now that happened to be a student orchestra who was saying that, or an orchestra that had loads and loads of rehearsal time. So they had time to unpick the part, and then next time they were going through to see some of those other things. But for everyone else, it's too many road sign syndrome. And I put that very same part to 3 other players who I know who play in the major groups in the UK, and they all said to me, there's too much information here. I don't have time to read it. You know, I'm playing a tam tam behind me. I've got to damp something else over there. The conductor is miles in that direction. You know, I can't do it. You've got to take things out of these parts. And the players don't complain about it because they've got too many other things to do. They've got to get on with the other pieces. And the part might be beautifully processed and look absolutely wonderful. So they're not going to complain about it because probably something else on their stand, it looks terrible for, you know, the reasons of bad spacing, and they've got to grapple with that. So your piece may look nice, but if it has sort of FF and FF sempre on every note, and every note has got 3 or 4 articulation marks, and that's a huge problem actually with contemporary music, is that composers feel insecure unless they put a sort of dot on a, for instance, a side drum or something, which, you know, there's only one way you can play it, a, you know, short note. And there's no point in writing a lot of articulation. You can do some, but not tons on every note. And all you clutter up things and you put in meaningless things because it's terribly easy in Sibelius to do cut and paste. You paste all of these things in, and the composer needs to. Some of them are great, but some are really absolutely set, and it's just kind of can be an insecurity thing of, you know, if I don't put all of that information in, someone will play this incorrectly. Sure they will, but you putting in more signs is not necessarily going to help that. Likewise, a lot of them will want you to have a playing score. They say all the players have got to see everybody else's part because it's a complicated interaction of pieces. And that's, again, players don't necessarily, they can't take in too much information. And then the group sees the score and says, forget it, we'll play something else. It's too complicated. We've not got enough rehearsal time to work our way around this piece. So you have to be really careful.
All of that true. And what in the chat, what was brought up was the fact that some people are now putting in, you say it's easy to copy and paste, especially articulations, et cetera, in Sibelius. And people put in a lot of these articulations for playback purposes when they're making the score. And now deRoche has solved that by having a an engraved versus playback feature where you can actually separate that out. I don't use deRoche yet, but I'm dabbling, and that's a very useful feature. But too often, I think that people do get into the over articulating those things specifically for playback, and then we have to have a separate score then for not playback, for notation only. So anyway, that's just a follow up on that.
That's a good point, to remind people to then take things out that aren't needed.
The other point, I suppose, would be that, you know, if you have very, very little rehearsal time, and a conductor is going to call start at bar X, and you're in the middle of this huge long passage where the note about how you perform something was way back, you know, you run the risk of having those players forget the mode of playing. And that goes for Pitts or Arco or whatever. We don't re-articulate that on every note. I mean, you remember where you were, but I think that there is a point to the I enjoy it, but the over notation of articulation is that if you have very little time and you're in a studio situation and they're going to call a start and the downbeat and that click comes and the downbeat goes, you know, you might want to see that articulation on every single note. And I again, I think they're different. This is context. It's what we're talking about, commercial music versus an edition that Faber would release for all time. And I do think there are reasons for both approaches. So it's worth noting that commercial music might have a different standard for that.
Yeah, well, also, no, I think you're absolutely right that a lot of the time you want to keep reiterating what's going on. After rests, you might, and over page turns, you might want to put Pitts or Arco in brackets, especially if other players are doing other things, and if in doubt, you know, put reminder dynamics. Certainly courtesy accidentals. I'm just always saying to people, you know, most rehearsals stop because a player queries the pitch of a note. Is it still a sharp? Is it a flat? Is it should it be a natural? Over a tie, you know, Sibelius will do funny things and forget to put those extra ones in or take them out for you accidentally, and that's where rehearsal time is wasted. So if in doubt, always put those extra ones in. It can clutter. Sometimes it clutters up things, but at the level of the part, and the player, and never to forget, the player only has their part, so they can't go and check things up. So they've got to waste precious time asking questions about, should they still be piano? Is there a crescendo missing? You can put non-crescendo if it's, you know, a big passage where everybody around you is doing something. Yeah, as you say, putting things in where you might need them.
Can we go back to something you just said for a second, which was the word courtesy accidentals? I would love 2 minutes on courtesy accidentals and parens, no parens, the plus and minus between confusing a player as to what key am I in versus disturbing the spacing of the music and putting extraneous black marks on a page when a natural will do. What is the parentheses telling me? I frankly am not an adherent to the parentheses situation, but I have my own little set of rules. Dying to know what you think.
Yeah, well, I think I'm sort of pretty much agreeing with what you say, that actually a parenthesis means you've got an extra symbol to read on the page. If I'm doing sort of elementary piano music, for instance, and you've got 1 or 2 in a piece, I might do that, because if you're at a learning stage, then a teacher can say why you've got them there, that they're not strictly necessary, but they're there just to assure you, because when you're older, your musical intelligence will be informing you that actually, okay, it is a courtesy one, but I know that I don't. I would agree with you that actually mostly I don't use them, because you need masses more space for them. And as you say, especially after a bar line, and if you've got 2 of them on a chord, and it's pushing that first beat wildly further. to the right. So yeah, generally I don't use them, but it's very, very hard to be absolutely consistent. And I'm not always. It's a context thing.
I am so glad to hear your answer on that, because I have my own little set of logical rules, and I am hoping they conform to your thinking, because because you're
Sounds
thinking
like it.
so right on everything. I mean, but the parentheses issue is always one that dogs us. So happy to have heard a little on that. I'll turn it over to anyone else who has things to say.
I love that you're taking the psychology of the players into what you're presenting in your book and in this discussion. And it's funny, in the years I've been doing this, I've had 2 people stop me and ask me why I don't use parentheses on my courtesy accidentals. 2. And it so happens they're brothers. And my very good friends. And my answer is, it messes with the spacing. It's superfluous information. And I will only use it if, for example, if I'm using a chord that has a sharp 9 in it, where in the same chord, I have a D sharp and then later a D natural. I'll give and the sharp is in the key signature. I'll give the natural I won't give the natural a parentheses because it's an accidental. But the person down below that's playing the regular third, yes, you are hearing a different note than the one you're playing. I mean this note to be this note.
Well, that's exactly. Then it's got a very specific musical function, which the musicians will pick up and understand why it's there. Yeah.
That's the only time I'll use it. But I just thought it was funny that you're having this guy, and the only 2 people I've ever been questioned on are brothers. How do you feel about double sharps and double flats? I understand the theory behind them and all that, but for me, unless they're a neighbor tone or maybe a passing chromatic tone, I don't like to use them because, again, it's stumbling the players. I don't like to use them if they're isolated, like if somebody's counting.
There's no point. There's very little point in using them if they're isolated. I mean, I generally advise composers when they're thinking enharmonically, and it's something I'm always teaching, saying to students if I'm talking, giving a talk about notation to students, is composers, is think about how you're spelling your passages. And you as a composer probably hear your music vertically in chords, but everyone singing and playing is reading a line of music horizontally, and you want to be spelling that as melodically and as enharmonically and as tonally as possible. And that's where you will have your double sharps. So if you're writing a Richard Strauss sort of passage that is in G sharp major or something, you will have an F double sharp within that context. But if it's isolated, then I would be putting that, into making that a G natural, for instance. So I mean, I think I'm agreeing with what you're saying, is that you're using them sparingly, and you are not just letting a computer, for instance, you've got your B flat clarinet parts, and how many of us have seen E sharps, abundance of E sharps and B sharps in any of the, in horns in F, clarinets in B flat. If you're not careful and you just transpose, everything is allowed to transpose upper tone, upper fifth, and you're not controlling, always we're doing transpose parts, I'm always spelling them so that you're using the least amount of accidentals and usually not using double sharps and double flats. It's so easy. It's so easy when you're not hand copying, isn't it? You can just change it. It's really easy compared to how it used to be. So.
Can I tell you a funny double sharp story that'll probably make you cringe? I was playing third trombone in a big band. The key signature was B flat, and the composer had put, it was a mistake. He put in A natural in there. I guess this isn't a double sharp story. It's just a regular sharp story. but it was an A natural and you're in the key of B flat. And he realized that was the wrong note. It really should have been a B flat. So instead of making it a B flat, he put a sharp in front of the A. It was the first note of the piece. He counted it off, and I spent 16 bars staring at the note, wondering why it was an A sharp. I couldn't play it. I didn't even know what note it was.
Exactly. That proves the point. You do things incorrectly, and it completely puts you off as a musician. Even if you've only got your own part, you've got your ears. You're thinking, how is this fitting in?
Yeah, I mean, I know what an A sharp is. I know where it is on the whole, but it contextually baffled me.
But you're playing something. Yeah, exactly. You're a musician, so you've got to understand how you're fitting in. That's why we spell things in a particular way. And I mean, if you do crazy things like that with singers, you know, you've had it. Anyone who needs to pitch out of their head, you know, you spell things badly like that, and you give them, an A sharp to a G flat to sing. I mean, you just can't do it. You've got to do it so that they can hear the intervals. They've got to be the right intervals to do that. And I mean, it's interesting. I had somebody with my choir was doing someone had at a recording session where we were producing some things for jingles or some music, and he'd written his own little choral piece for this, and whatever he'd used was just, you know, had the accidentals were just all haywire all over the place, different accidentals. So you had sharps and flats all intermingled, and it made sort of no tonic, you know, there was no tonic. You couldn't see where the chords were or anything. And it was even with the very, very best sight reading amateurs that I know in London, it was just impossible for us to sing this. You know, 4 bars were sort of, you know, sort of E sharps and A flats. You just couldn't hear it, and you couldn't see vertically either. And it was an interesting example of, okay, if you want to make something a real disaster, it's really just how easy it is by doing things incorrectly and just not understanding how musicians do things, how they read. And that's it, how we read on the page. You know, the next thing we need to all to be doing is thinking, or a lot of people someone needs to be doing a lot more research on how we read on a screen, because, you know, that'll be the next, you know, there'll be a lot more very soon, people reading on screens, and what kind of differences we need to make to modify how things should look on a screen.
That was actually brought up in the chat. Some people were talking about iPads and
yes, exactly.
Page turn issues. Whether we change our thinking about that and such.
But also how you want that to, because I did some work with Tito on who were developing some software where the music could move along while you were playing it, so you could just have a bar on a line, or as many bars as you wanted to, so the music was moving, and what the effect of that would be if you were learning a piece. And of course there's not, it just seemed to me that was, you know, going to have very particular problems, that you're used to, that how we read and we learn a particular page in its particular format, and what happens if you move that. And I know the reaction of orchestras and players to new editions of older pieces, and you know, they've learned a piece with an addition, and, you know, they've had it for 30 years one way in their head, and now they've got something different, and that's a very big problem. Even if you produce you know, a new text edition of something where you've corrected all the mistakes in a Beethoven symphony or something, but someone has got to relearn it in a different format, and it's got very particular problems, and so there can be a lot of resistance to doing that, you know, because of that. The different spacing, it doesn't look the same, it doesn't feel the same, and there's a lot of things to be discussed within that. And, you know, you're all talking about the look. We're all talking about the look of a page. We're not even talking about the sound, but we know how important all that is.
Your comment about reading from the screen, in Los Angeles anyway, there's a lot of remote recording going on since, you know, in the past year, and musicians are getting their music delivered to them, or they take it off a file and they are looking at it on a screen. I doubt if any of them are printing it out. I'm guessing that they're all looking and recording from a screen. And it does make a difference. And I tell people that going from the other direction, when they're going to print something for a session or some sort of performance, before to print out a page, to look at it, to see how it looks, because they are also deceived when they're working on a project, how it looks on their screen, how the Sibelius file looks. And then they're quite surprised when they actually print the page, how it looks. The spacing might be different. It might be beautiful on their screen, but when they print it on a 9x12 sheet of paper or an 8.5 by 11, whatever it is, it could look quite different.
Yeah, page size, something that young composers, particularly when they're having to produce their own parts, and this is going back to the when composers produce their own materials, they one is so used to looking at a page on a screen and having a lot of information there, and they often, when they produce their own parts, they may be very beautifully spaced and so on, but often they're producing something on a page there's so much information on it, you simply can't read it. I mean, I've had students bring along A3 parts, so that's bigger than 9x12 inches, and full of staves, and it's just too dense. You just can't get your head around it. Equally, a composer who's really has written a lot of music and has produced these A3 playing score pages for a small ensemble, loose-leaved A3 sheets on white shiny paper that were sent to an ensemble, and they said, well, we can't read them for two reasons. A, we got a reflection of shiny paper, and B, how long is it going to take us to work out how to play a playing score, and where are we going to put the pages? Once we, she said the chairman of the ensemble is going to say this looks a mess with you're performing something and having to throw pages off, or you can't have 6 players with 4 music stands each. And anyway, the cellist can't move along a music, there are 4 music stands. You've got the practicalities, you've got to be thought about. And it does involve more work, because actually, probably what a player wants, especially if something is unconducted, is maybe their own line plus another cue line, which is like a little short score of things that are happening simultaneously, which you might need. And that'll take a bit of work. But what you need to do, of course, is what we all do, is edit down the amount of information, have the important bits there, and amalgamate them onto a small stave or even a rhythm cue, so that you're limiting the information, but at the same time, it means you can pack a load on a page so that you can have a decent page turn.
We do that in theater music with the piano conductor part.
Exactly.
We only do it in theater for that part because there's a practical reason, but there's no reason that exact technique can't be applied to doing instrumental parts, contemporary instrumental parts. I mean, it's the same concept. And this is another thing for the group, which is skill building. I mean, if you don't know orchestration and you don't know music theory, you don't know how to read a score and know what is going to be heard or what's principal or what's key. Those are things you need to learn. So go back to school and revisit score reading. That's a really, really important skill as a copyist.
Yep.
Hi, Elaine. This is Ross. I just wanted to jump in. Thank you for an amazing presentation. Really just great discussion. I had 2 questions. One, from the time you fully realized that you were going to write the book to the time you saw it coming off the conveyor belt, your really wonderful moment, how much time? Because as you were showing your examples, it was just editing, and I mean, just an incredible amount of detail and just perseverance is the word I kept thinking.
Yeah, that was 21 years.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
So that was the ideas came in I'd been at Faber for 3 years, so 1990 was when we first talked about me doing something, and the book was ready for press in 2010, and then it was printed in 2011. We waited till after Christmas so that all the Christmas publication market had gone. And of course, because I'd been doing a lot of it in my own time. I was running, for that first 8 years, I was running the department, kind of contemporary music editorial department, by myself. So I couldn't keep asking for too much time off to do this. So I was writing it in, weekends, holidays, here and there. And then I had gradually a bit more time off. I had an assistant, and so he, had other people, more help to come in while I then took official time off later on to write it. So I'd have a week off and I'd rewrite a bit more and so on. But it all benefited in a way from having, I'd come back to a chapter, I wouldn't have looked at it for a couple of years, but that's really benefits, because you can see, if you're kidding yourself and you've got some really dodgy information where you're sitting on the fence, which I have to say was something I felt that Gardner Reed does. He leaves things hanging in the air about the way you can do things, but then doesn't give a judgment as to what you should do in a given context. So anything that was a sort of, oh, well, you can do something like this. Yeah, but do you want to recommend it or not? So it was good. I could go in then and say, no, this isn't watertight, so I can take it out. And of course, most of the information's been around for the 150 years, the way I'm talking about you do things. So things weren't dating. The one thing that will date is talking about electroacoustic music and how you notate that. And I'm talking about CDs and tape in there. In a few years' time, people won't know what those are. So of course, that in terms of notating the score will need to change, but it doesn't change the principles of what you're going to do. There will be, I'm sure, different ways when score reading becomes, and recognition of scores becomes more, and you can get more sort of automatic score writing and things.
Right.
I think the principles aren't going to change. Just like I didn't, one or two critics wanted me to add some more information about extended techniques. You could write books and books on extended techniques. You might have one composer who invents a whole catalogue of special techniques, as indeed Lackerman does, Chelsea does. There's a lot of people working who are doing that. But that's another volume. I said to someone, well, that could be behind bars too, but someone else can write that, because there's a lot of work there, and some of these techniques might stay individual to particular composers. They're evolving. I'd rather have the principles there. So you can take the principle, if you've decided you have invented a new technique, you can take a principle from my book and follow that through with some, don't use alienating notation, try and use some straightforward notation, give an explanation, make it easy for the player to read it, and work with them about how to express what it is they need to know, for instance. Or you can make a recording now, you see, or a video of a special technique. So that's the sort of separate things that you can now do that you couldn't have done a few years ago.
Being primarily in the commercial field, myself, my two pet peeves that you brought up today are spacing and courtesy accidentals, and cover them wonderfully. And another thing popped up in the chat about 8VB and 8VA, and being that I'm a low brass player and I did it still continue to do it in the LA studios when we get back to work. What is I know there's a section in the book, but I don't have it in front of me. Can you give us a 2-minute explanation on your feeling on 8VB and 8VA?
Well, I tend to use, I personally just use 8, but you can use any of them. You can use either of those. I tend to use 8VA, meaning, 8, meaning ottava sopra or alta, and ottava bassa. It should be obvious from the context, and if it's where it's placed, whether it's meaning higher or lower, and according to if you've got the bracket around it, that will show you which way it is. or I just, yeah, I mean, I personally, I just like 8. I mean, what's, you know, generally, if you've got a bold, something that looks a different, you know, it's not too thin, it's looking chunky and thick, a musician is going to recognize that as that's what it is.
Absolutely.
Can I further with that question?
Absolutely.
You said how you use them, but when won't you use them? I mean, are there certain like certain instances when you want the keyboard to play in its very highest register a chord, it makes sense to use them. You know, bass trombone players, I know bass trombone players where their license plate says 8VB, you know, and trumpet players, you know, everybody wants to, when you're young, wants to play up the octave to show off. But in reality, in printed music, Elaine, when won't you use them?
Yeah, well, mostly orchestral instruments, I say mostly you keep off them. Most orchestral instruments don't ever need them, and you only use them for but you know, for your high instruments, you're only using them for very, very top notes of violin, flute and clarinet, and only, you know, that is if you are using. And if you're using a lot of very high flute and clarinet, the chances are you know, it's going to be quite excruciating. So I would say you're using up to 4 ledger lines, about 4 ledger lines, and then going into the octave signs after that for violins. And then for the low instruments, yeah, you're only using them for bass, trombone, tuba. I just can't think of it. Is there any other orchestral instrument? I don't know that there are.
Piano.
Else needs them, because
Piano.
cellos and basses for high stuff. They can go. You know, they can use the other clefs.
Clefs, yeah.
Piano and harp.
And yeah, exactly. So you're using them for your keyboards and your celestra and your piano and harp.
I get tempted to want to use them for really low bass clarinet parts, particularly with the ones with the low C extension. But I know that instrument isn't constructed in an octave overtone, and that messes them up, and they don't like to see that at all.
They absolutely hate exactly. Exactly. They don't like it because you've got the 12th, the overtones 12th, so that messes up their fingering. So they will soon tell you that they do not like that.
They would rather count the low ledger lines than recalculate their.
So, and I think those often come in because, of course, you can use them in a score, and in the old-fashioned scores, of course, there was not space to do that. And so you see crazy scores, early 20th century scores, where everything is crunched up, and the engravers had to use octave signs all the time. And then the copyists have transferred that to parts if they've not been diligent and not understood that that's not acceptable in a part. So that and occasionally when if you've got a part that has occasional high or low notes in the piano, for instance, composers quite often like to keep it so you get that sense of the enormous contour that you've got to travel. And I might put even the letter name of the note in if I've just done that, just to say for one note, if there's a particular reason, or you've got something else in that stave already and you don't want to use an octave sign.
Just as a tuba player, at least in the last 10 or 15 years, as they've written lower and lower and lower, I would rather see the 8VB, because once you get past 4 ledger lines, it really starts to be problematic, especially for longer, extended moving lines. So I think copyists, at least on the West Coast out here, I don't know if Liz would agree with me, but we've started to do some of that. And I've talked to my colleagues, and they tend to agree with me. So,
well, I think that's good, because with the computer software, the problem is that you can generate notes on masses of ledger lines for keyboard parts, for instance. And of course, as a hand copyist, you'd never have done that because it takes far too much work. And it means, I see people who've done piano reductions and they're impossible to play because everything's on 5 or 6 ledger lines, and you're thinking, for goodness sake, transpose it. So actually, I find there's the opposite problem now, and I can't read it, and it just takes me ages. I get so much eye strain from reading these scores with all of these massive ledger lines. What happens when as you say, you've got all those ledger lines and you turn a page quickly and play the next note, and you've got no relationship to the previous note there. So how are you going to see the pitch?
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to enharmonics,
Mm-hmm.
if you change, and I kind of know what I would do, but if you change an enharmonic in a part to accommodate a linear approach to the player, you have to go back and change it in the score to match. I mean, I was taught the score has to match the part.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? It's a difficult one, because if I used to feel I ought to do that, and quite honestly, sometimes I don't, because you may have already separated the score from the parts by the time you're producing those. And if you're producing something for a first performance, you might be in a bit of a hurry, but you just want to make the part look better. Right. And you've already, my view is that with the transposed part, you've already changed the enharmonic spelling anyway.
If you've been given a concert score.
Yeah, if you've been given a concert score, which we usually are working with a concert score. Okay. So that is a difficult one. I mean, yes, I think if I was then going to be publishing a score forever, I would try to ensure that they were the same, that the spellings were the same between them, which means, and some composers do that anyway. Some composers who are real craftsmen do that anyway. They think like a player, they think like a copyist. Colin Matthews was a case in point of that. That every score, so you'll have a unison line between different players, and players coming in and out of the same line, with rests here and there, and they'll be spelt differently according to how their line will look best. And I think that's fantastic. What he's saying is, okay, you conductor, okay, you score reader, you've got to learn this anyway. So if it's not obvious to you what you play, that's bad luck. But what I'm doing is I'm accommodating how this will to help the tuning to be best, because I'm giving familiar intervals to these players, which means that it's more likely to be played well first time.
I think the question is, we understand that that's what the players need to see. But the question that was in the chat room, which I understand very well because it happens, the composer or the person in the booth is looking at the score and they want to see the E sharp, because it's part of the chord that they can identify with.
Yeah.
Even though it might have been changed for the part. And so to answer anybody's question out there, you have to know, as a copyist, you have to know who you're working for and what you want to do what they want to see for them. And then you pretty much, they're happy to have you do what's correct for the player, I believe. I don't think there's any argument about that. But, I've even worked on some films where we hand wrote in chord vertical change, the chord changes, because this composer couldn't figure out, there were no chord changes, there was no rhythm section, but he wanted to know what the chords were that were going on vertically. And so we went through the whole score and penciled in chord changes for him. But complaining all the way perhaps, but we were doing what he wanted, and that's the job. You do what you have to do. So in both cases, so it does happen that you might have to have a separate score independent of the parts to accommodate somebody.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think there isn't a cut. Yes, absolutely. There isn't a right answer to that. It does depend on the context. And is it a professional conductor? Is it someone for a recording session who actually is a composer rather than a conductor, and they want to see things? Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah.
Russ,
that is very important.
Can I jump in for a second and ask? So you used we talked just use the word concert score. So a quick for the group at large, a quick discussion of are we now in a world where we're only going to be seeing concert scores as full scores, or is there a place still for transposed scores as the full score? And that's a question I get asked often in the theater. Old school people always had big band style scores with transposed score on the podium. Nowadays, a lot of people just want to see concert score. Elaine?
Yeah, well, it's a mixture. It's mostly concert scores at concert pitch, but and it tends to be the older composers who were taught their craft properly, you might say, who like to see, who will refuse to see horns in concert. They say it looks wrong, and of course you can see the argument as from a point of view of a craftsman. If your music looks right on the stave, it's going to look, when it's transposed, it's going to look right for that instrument. It's going to stop you writing horn parts that are massively on the top note, because it's going to look too high. It's going to, if you've got top C's there all the time. So it's actually, I think it's good. It should be like that. I personally think that conductors should be able to read these scores, and I don't think they all can read the transposed scores. So I think they like to be sure that the composer knows what they're writing and haven't made errors. That's another thing. And often in a language which is non-tonal, it's hard enough to read what's going on and to hear. So I think they want a score in C so that everybody knows, the conductor knows the composer's got the notes right. On the other hand, they can't then check if there's a transposing mistake. They can't. It's very difficult when they're talking to the player then, because they've got different notes. So you can't immediately see those, if there are any of those kind of errors, or if something's not being transposed, or it's been doubly transposed. I mean, easy to do these kind of things. But mostly now we would transpose, if you've got a clarinet sonata or something, a small piece, you would transpose it for publication. You wouldn't have a piano part with a clarinet, a B flat clarinet part written at concert pitch, for instance, because it would look wrong. So we tend to do that, and to have transposed scores for bands. Yeah, for bands, for wind bands, brass bands, because those conductors do, their tradition there is that their players, they want to see things transposed. So you've got these wonderful brass band scores where you've only got the bass trombone in bass clef, and absolutely everything else is transposed and in the treble clef. And that's what they're used to seeing. And it means that all the parts, they kind of look like they're all in the same range, because they all fit in the stave. That's the whole point of the transposition.
Right.
So they look good.
I think that in the chat we're getting a lot of chat about the subject, and I do think that maybe you'll save the chat at the end, and you'll Elaine, you'll get to read everybody's comments. But this is a big one. This is a big subject, and
yes,
I think that one of the considerations in the commercial music field is that plenty of people are looking at a score, no time in the booth, engineers, people who may not have the skills that a traditional conductor trained might have. So oftentimes it's expedient to just have a C score, even though to me, looking at, horn parts not transposed looks, doesn't, the ranges look strange. I can't tell if they're out of range, it's difficult, but I do, there obviously, it's a long discussion, but this is a good start. It's a good start.
Interestingly, I had to actually deliver a project today where the conductor had a transposed score and everybody else had concert scores.
Oh.
Yep.
Well, this is the most silence we've had for a while. This is so. There are certainly a lot of questions that came in previously to us, and I don't. We could be here for days trying to get to everything. Russ, did you want to see if we could do like a real fast?
I'll look at a couple of them. I did take a look at them a few minutes ago. Most of them are pretty covered.
Yeah. One of the questions I saw earlier for Elaine was, your thoughts as far as Sibelius versus Dorico. And if some,
yep.
and I was asking if somebody were new to getting learning notation, what would you suggest?
Yeah, well, we were Faber. We kind of evolved. We've evolved our software notation, as it were, our practices with Sibelius. When Sibelius first came out, we were working with the Finn twins, and they were tweaking things, and we were requesting things. And the first scores that came out, first published score, I think, that was from a music publisher, was a George Benjamin piece using the very new Acorn Sibelius. So we've gone along with using Sibelius all that time. And Dorico is absolutely wonderful to look at. And it was created in the image of my book. So when I was invited to the launch and I saw this music, and I thought, crumbs, it looks exactly like my music examples. In other words, Daniel had taken the spacing from my book and found a way of creating it in a different way so that you get beautiful spacing. What I can say is that at the moment, as an editor, I tend to sort of stay outside using too much of the software myself. My colleagues sort of make themselves specialists in using the software. We have used Sibelius because it suits us as a publisher. It does most of the things that we need it to do well now. And also we need to support every single version that there's ever been, because we've got loads of scores in all these different, going back to the very first Acorn ones, every single version of Sibelius, we've got tons of scores in because our composers have been using it. Some of them have been using it from the start, and most of them are now using that. We've not used Dorico yet. Personally, I'm actually looking forward to getting my hands on Dorico, because I think it's going to be much really intuitive for me to use. We haven't yet, and I haven't yet, and that's simply from the practical reason that you've got all these files already in Sibelius, and it's better for us at the moment to keep all the music that we have on one system, just because managing it, if you need to create different versions, you need to correct it. It's just a case of when we're preparing that we will very soon, that someone will get it, one of our house composers, and we will need to use Dorico. And at that point, I'm looking forward to actually having the time to get around to using it, because I keep seeing it and I'm interested in seeing what they've been doing with the development of it. So yeah, it'll be coming soon, and it'll be great.
Thank you.
Do you find that you still have to edit stuff on the Acorn Sibelius on any pieces, or have you actually converted them to newer versions?
Well, generally, there is a converter. So what we do is, we convert them. We've got one or two old machines where we can still access them, and then we've moved them. We've moved all the old ones so that there is a version. Of course, you lose a lot of things, but you've got your raw data there, and so then if you need to go back in onto a page and change something, for instance, for a reprint of a score, you might spot an error, or there might be a change in something that you've published. But it's a risky business, seeing what then converts, and you've got to reproof it all and everything back in place. But but we do that.
Because the whole thing was that there were so many things that you could do. You could do anything, but it was more graphic than notation wise within the program. So I can imagine if you convert it, a lot of things would go very haywire. So
they do, yes, they can. Yeah.
A lot of people here probably won't even know what the Acorn program was like, but it was actually a magnificent program.
Yeah, very stable.
I'd like to say, for those who had questions that didn't get answered, if you don't have Elaine's book, get the book. So many things. I mean, she has covered everything. And somebody asked, we had a question about rests and odd meters and how to deal with those, and some of the extended notation, different kinds of notation, and so forth. So I can't tell you how great, and I think most of you could realize that after seeing the 20 years that she has devoted to this book, you can understand why it's worth every penny that you spend getting it, I think. So it's really a fine, fine book. So if you didn't get something answered today, just go get the book, you know?
So the one question that was repeatedly asked, I think you answered it, but I'll ask it because people ask, the second edition, when is it coming?
Yeah, well, not anytime soon, judging from the sales figures, because generally what publishers do is if a book is selling well, you don't need to change the edition. But if something is, once sales start tailing off, that's when you try and you reinvent interest in it by producing a second edition, so that you can then, your marketing department can then shout about that.
Okay,
Well,
so
sales figures are actually still going up remarkably.
They should stop buying, then everyone should stop buying the book today. Get off Amazon right now. Stop buying the book, put a hiatus on that, and then you'll do the second edition.
Well, yeah. Well, actually, I mean, I'm really pleased to say, because people occasionally ask, well, what would you do? If you were doing it again, what would you do differently, or are there things you regret not putting in? And the answer is very, very little indeed. In fact, hardly anything. There were things that got taken out, and all the kind of topics that, for instance, cover your area. I just decided, well, look, I'm not an expert in those. I'm not going to talk about things I don't know about. They're, a different set of rules. And I didn't sort of talk about, pop notation or, chord symbols, all sorts of things. I thought, no, there's other people who are specialists in that area. I'm just, there's so much I can say. I'm just going to cover things that I want to know, and and the people that I've worked with. And when I went along to players, I'd say, what do you want? What would you like? Here's an example of this technique. How would you like it written? This is your chance. There's 3 ways I've got here. Well, how would you like it to be? Come on, help me create the solutions to 1 or 2 of these unusual things that haven't been notated very often. And so yes, I guess at some point there will be a second edition. I've not got very much to put in it yet, quite honestly. There are things one could say and do something different, but there's so much there already. I think it's sort of quite enough to absorb, really.
I want to thank the person that just put in the chat that Emily and I should write a book about theater music notation. That was nice to see, but I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
Particularly if it took you 21 years. If I started now, I don't know. Yeah.
I think we need another event.
Yeah, I would be happy to, to try and answer. There were 1 or 2 that came in, which are sort of quite specific. And yes, it would be, a little bit hard to work out the answer from my book, although it's kind of in there, but a bit hidden. So, I mean, I am happy to, if you want to forward them, some of them to me, that are quite specific and, of less general interest, to answer them. And then send them back to you to field.
Okay.
Russ can jump in on this too, but the same thing we've been talking about as far as jazz chords and jazz charts, and it's all about what's on the page. Again, you have to leave, on a guitar part or a bass part, you have to leave a little extra room for the chords. There's a general rule about where you want to put those chords, so they, especially if it's over a bass line or a guitar line, but at the end of the day, we're still asking what the players want to see, and you may only get 8 staves on a page, and then a page turn, and however it works out. But it's about readability, because generally it's the same kind of deal. Whether you're in a rehearsal band and you're just doing that chart for the first time, or you're in a recording situation in Hollywood and you're at Capitol and you only get to see it 1 time, just like this, and so it's got to be right and it's got to be clear. And that's really at the end of the day. It's the same philosophy you've been talking about all today. So.
But yes, no, I'm happy to answer questions. In fact, obviously that's going to be the source for my second edition if there are things that are not quite clear in this one.
I think that we should just now take the time to thank Elaine for this last 2 hours here.
Gosh, yeah.
And it seems like 5 minutes have gone by to me. I've enjoyed it so much, and there was so much I didn't expect. I didn't expect to see a tour of a factory for sure.
Yeah, likewise. That was amazing.
It would be interesting to have another event where we get all the questions, because we can save all the questions in the chat. Everybody who's still with us should click on the 3 dots in the bottom right-hand corner of your page and click on Save Chat, because then you can see everything. But I think we need another event with you and everybody.
We could, I mean, if anybody wants to ask a specific question, if Elaine is willing to answer, I mean, I'm sure there are people who are willing to stay on the call. I don't make a decision one way or the other, but it's certainly the chat was lively enough that I don't think everyone's ready to rock out of here. So,
well, if you want to carry on with the rest of your business that you were going to discuss, I can stay on the call afterwards.
We might even, I don't know, Russ, if you're daring enough to have people open their mics and ask a question.
I got a thought. How about Annie? We'll start with Annie if she's got something. If she doesn't, don't worry. But I'm just saying she could come to the top of the pile.
Hi, Elaine. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Absolutely fascinating. I knew we knew each other, and I'd forgotten exactly how we'd met.
Yeah, I feel my life has now come full circle.
Extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, it's absolutely fascinating hearing all that. Well, I'm glad. I hope the advice I gave you with pens and paper was helpful.
I'm sure it was.
That's great. Thank you. Well, keep up the good work. It's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Ryan Beard asked, Elaine, when do you break your own rules?
Oh,
hard to answer that.
Yeah,
but
yeah. Well, I think that is you. I think that's what you learn, isn't it? You get to a certain point in your expertise and you realize you start breaking them quite a lot of the time. But you've got to get to that point where you know that you can do that and it doesn't bother you. It's like at what point can you be inconsistent within your own score or your own parts? And you making that judgment call requires the experience and the confidence to know that you can do that, because there's always
yeah. Oh my God.
So that's it's yes I think I do, and given certain context you just have to you have to sort of, you look at something, you think, actually I'm just going to sort of sit on this, I'm going to sleep on this, work out how to do a particular, you got something that looks, when something doesn't look right on the page. So I tend to look at it, come back to it, and then you might think, yes, I'm going to break my normal rules and do such and such, because in this given context, it is so difficult to read as it is. I'm going to, for this section of a piece, do something different. And breaking the rules, it'll all be about trying to make something look clearer. And I can even sometimes think of actually putting an explanation to the player, because if you've got a very intelligent player who's going to analyze what you're doing, you can just say, in this section, I've done this because I thought this, this is to enable you to read this quickly or whatever.
I'm jealous of the word sleep on it, because I've never in my experience had the ability to sleep on anything. Any other questions from the group? Somebody daring enough to open a mic and ask?
Somebody, Tom's iPad has a hand up. I don't know who Tom is.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I have a question. Say you're in a, maybe not a tonal, but a piece that doesn't have a real tonal center. And so you're not using a key signature. And some people advise use sharps going up and flats going down. And I've also thought about well, what's the closest key, and then use accidentals to modify it. But what is the best practice for that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's what I recommend. That you make something look, even if it's not tonal, even if it's completely doesn't have any. I mean, most pieces do have some kind of tonic or some sort of note center. Yeah, I go up in sharps and down in flats because that's what we're all used to practicing our scales doing. If you've got something familiar, you can, often you have to change halfway through a phrase. I would change from sharps to flats halfway through a phrase if you've got lots of, if you've got one particular pattern that looks good in one, and then I would change it to avoid the double sharps and double flats, and to avoid E sharps and B sharps, if you can change a whole phrase. And at what point you do that, well, it could be different for different instruments in a phrase. But yeah, I think it's well worth making something look easy to play, isn't it?
Thank you.
If it comes about less information, sometimes it's better. I can't tell you, Russ, my fellow low brass copyist, I'm sure will back me up on this. When you're like playing in ledger lines below the staff on a bass trombone or a tuba, and you're going down and you're seeing sharp natural, sharp natural, sharp natural, sharp natural, you just want to give it up.
I'm still laughing at you staring at the A sharp for 16 bars.
Oh, and that's one of the reasons I stopped playing. I mean, it was a fun rehearsal band, and the guy copied his stuff in pen, and he was a real nice guy and stuff. But I said, I can't do this anymore. I spend too much time sweating over bad copy, and I just can't play. But it was a good study of things. I mean, he brought charts in that got played wrong week after week after week after week. And, didn't it ever occur to him that maybe there was a problem in how he was presenting it? I mean,
until we tell them very nicely off to the side. Yeah, that's how we do it.
He goes, it's fine. It's fine. I played in a band in San Francisco, and every time we played Happy Birthday, it was a train wreck. It was slow, then it went into double time, and then it came to the end, and it was halftime for the outro of it. And whenever we got there, it was a train wreck. And it never occurred to the band leader that maybe he needed to look at his notation, because he had a band of professional players literally train wrecking every time he played it. And it was Happy Birthday. Let's play this for somebody, it's their, 80th birthday, train wreck. So it just doesn't occur to people. But I had to really stop, putting myself in those situations. I was playing at that point just for fun, and it became not fun.
Next,
go ahead, Emily.
Another question from somebody. Del Engen. Double dots. Always, sometimes, never.
Sometimes, and that depends. It depends on the context. If you're playing a Bruckner symphony, you'll have triple dotted notes. If you're in 4/4, if you're in a common time that is easy to read, and you don't need to force the player to think of each beat, you can have double dotted notes. It depends on the context and what you need the player to read. If you want them to see each beat, if you want it to be a bit safer, you're probably better to force them to divide up in their head each beat, so that they can see exactly how long so that they divide up that final note value before that, the short note, whatever it is.
So the half, and showing the half bar. I mean,
showing the half, exactly.
The holy
exactly.
half bar.
Yes, yeah.
Invisible, right.
There was an interesting question in the chat from Laura. It said, Elaine, do you have a favorite, most memorable job, either positive or negative, that you could share as a learning experience for our audience here today?
Gosh. Well, I think you just remember the nightmare jobs, don't you? When things go smoothly, you just think, well, that's the job, and I'm just getting on with the next one. Well, I I was Oliver Nusson's editor, bless him, for years. And when I was freelance, I was working on his two wonderful Maurice Sendak operas, and it took him years to finish them. So I think my memories of certainly my early years in Faber are of getting a call from Ollie saying, well, actually, I've just had this idea in the middle of the night, and so I wrote down this new version that I'd like the orchestra to play this evening. So, you know, a bit like your world, there were one or two times where, yeah, I just had, you know, would be driving around London, picking up the music from his house. He happened to live down the road from where I live in London, and I'd be taking it round to 3 or 4 copyists, hand copying, and say, you know, I'll be back at 9 o'clock in the morning to pick it up. And then I'd put someone on a train to take it up to the concert hall, which actually that happened to be the Albury Festival. That happened to be that Snake Maltings, as in my first photo. And you know, that was a live broadcast at 7:30. So we did have, you know, one did have, you know, a bit of the sort of thing you have every day. There were 1 or 2 times like that, and that was very stressful because it's when I was a kind of one-man department, and you know, bringing in freelancers off, pretty much, you know, music students off the street to come and sit and copy things, and we did have things like that, and it just made things very traumatic for everybody, and of course the musicians were not very pleased. He did that in the recording sessions at Abbey Road for Higgledy Piggledy Pop, so for his second opera, and he called me up, and I just thought, hold on, you know, yeah, bring a bottle of you know, Tipp-Ex and an eraser and some pen and ink and paper, because I've just had this idea and I've just rescored this movement up at, you know, down a semitone because the sopranos had a bit of a cold, and this is our final recording session. We've got 3 hours left, and so I, you know, had to copy a section, put it on the stand, and you could imagine the reaction of the players. What's this? Right, you've got 1 hour to get this in the can, and that's, you know, and that's the recording session that we've spent, you know, 24 hours doing or whatever. So it can't be mucked up. And that's the only way he could finish the you know, the work on that, was to it was done and it was finished, but generally after that he would just go away quietly and write a piece, and then I would get it, and I just don't, you know, if you have the whole thing, I don't mind if you've got a bit of warning that you've got to get it done quickly. You know, we've had 1 or 2 operas which have been very late and where we've had to bring in lots of extra people to do that, and you think the trouble is, okay, they're not all trained up how you want to do things. You realize then, you know, the good copyists that you have, the good people you work with, you train a team of freelance people. We have, unfortunately, we can't give that many work to that many people all the time, so you only train a limited number of people who you can use, who know immediately what you need to do, and so you just give them the work and they get on with it. They know how to model your parts, how you like your cues to be done, and all the house styling sort of things that you want. And yeah, when you have a crisis like that where something has to be done, you use other people, that's when you realize that it's not obvious to everybody else what you do. But good times are when there is enough time to sort things out. I love, if I can, to get the score to the conductor really early, and if I think there's going to be problems, I actually send something to the conductor even without telling the composer, and say, are you sure this is going to be okay? You know, don't complain later. Can you conduct these crazy time signatures at this crazily fast speed? You know, are you going to be able to do that okay? Or do we need to amalgamate some of these bars so that, you know, you can wave your arm at a sensible speed? You know, what that kind of thing. You know, as an editor, having the time to do that is wonderful, because of course that's what, you know, we all should be finding the problem areas before you get it copied, because of course it's too late. It's too expensive to put right, to rebar a piece later on. Or it drives me mad when later a conductor says, "Oh, I want you to rebar this piece." You know, it's all that expense of revising everything, and you really don't want to be doing that. And sometimes we do, and I think, well, crumbs, I told the composer that in the first place. I'm really annoyed. I suggested, I told him, you can't have 1/8 bars, you can't have 1/16 bars. They're just driving everybody mad. A conductor, they're an upbeat. Amalgamate them. Let's amalgamate them. Come on, let's think of these things. Let's, and this bit's over orchestrated. Can we think of this now? I don't want you in front of that, a whole symphony orchestra being humiliated by saying this orchestra is too thick, we can't hear the soloist, we need to take this out now. Will you do this now? So when you can do that in advance and things work, it's really, really nice to see that.
Absolutely.
Greg has his hand up, so why don't we give him a shot here? Hi, Greg.
Elaine, thank you for a wonderful session. And your book is my Bible after many years with Gardner Reed. My question is, where do you think we're going to be in 10 years when everything perhaps is going to be electronic and we really won't have any paper anymore? And I'm just wondering what your thoughts will be, and if there will have to be a set of guidelines posted somewhere that people will follow when they're all electronic.
Yeah, well, I think they will have to. I think we will need to think about. I mean, maybe that will be the thing that I will be needing to. We all need to be writing about. Is how things look on screen. But the principles I expect won't be different to how we lay things out. There will be certain considerations. I also don't think. I'm wondering if there will be a time when we don't use paper, because there's been a lot of resistance to reading, music frequently, or the same piece of music. In other words, when you're studying something as a player, solo music, learning an instrument, whether in fact people will want to do that electronically. I don't. I also like my old quartet parts, that I've marked up. Do I want to see those electronically? I don't. I think paper is going to be a lot around for a long time, not necessarily for sessions. And it makes sense if you're reading a piece of music once, or does it? You can all tell me that, to read it on screen, so you don't even need to print it out if it's never going to be played again.
I agree with you. I think paper is going to be around a long time, especially if you're on the scoring stage and making changes, wholesale changes right on the spot. Paper is still way, way more versatile because the player can make that, as you had said earlier, just make that quick change. And even if we have to go put 16 bars of the viola into the violin and we do it on the next session, or even on the next after a 10 or something, we can do that rather quickly and be done with it. So I'm not sure. I think it's gonna come, but I don't think it's 10 years.
Well, to that point, Ross, I was going to say, like as a musician sitting on a scoring stage, and if we spread our music out, and let's say we have 3 pages that are open, and maybe the conductor realizes he has to shorten a cue, and so on the first page, he's going to say, okay, so from bar 18, I need you to cut over to number 48. And let's cut those bars out. So a person with paper can write it and you can see where it's going to go. But, having to do it on the computer, I think, on your iPad, I don't know. I think I hope paper stays around for a long time.
Yeah, there's massive danger when you're deleting things. It's the practicalities of changing things on when things are on file and sessions are in, music is actually being played at the same time. Right. It's we find this with the revisions. It's it's very easy. The file management has to be meticulous, and you can't see where things are changed. At least when you paste things on, you can see you've taken out that 4 bars. The joins and so on. When you're cutting and pasting and revising things digitally, it's just a different discipline, and you have to be so careful how
Yeah.
those judgments and
What would happen if you come back later in the session, like in the afternoon in the session, the changes happened in the morning and you're on an iPad, and then they say, okay, we want you to reinstate these bars, and you know, I don't know. And Andrew Green says, you know, paper doesn't run out of battery.
I've played through the scenario in my head, how I would set up, let's just say Radio City Christmas or something, to work on pads. And, you know, as a practical exercise in my head, I know how to do it, assuming price is no object. But at the end of the day, I would want every player to have their music in a book under their chair.
Right.
You know, because if the power, you know, technology fails one way or the other, and I would want that book right there as a backup in every scenario I've thought out.
Well, maybe we could get the two hands up, if that's okay with you, Elaine.
Good to see you. You were all talking about meticulous file management, and it brought to mind versioning. Because versioning, making sure that everybody's on the right one, how it's labeled, how it's marked, how you track it internally. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yes, well, I agreed. You have to, yeah, you need to be really careful, and it's a good discipline for composers to do when they're producing their scores to start with as well.
So how do you manage that side?
Oh, so I see. Well, labeling, and every time you change something, you change the version number, I should think, and you keep. We archive all our previous versions of everything.
So do you have a special tool, or is it just folder management and file labeling?
Yeah, it's the latter, I think.
Yeah. And how do you track your changes and comments over time?
Woo. It's time consuming. Yeah, I mean, you're probably putting them on the next generation of file all the time.
Like as an attendant.
Yeah, you're not using a master file to track the changes. We're assuming, well, because we're working in a field where we have to assume that the piece when you finished editing it is the final version. And as a publisher, if we're fiddling around revising pieces all the time, we are losing money hand over fist. So you've got to discourage your composer from doing that at that stage. They need to be doing that at an earlier stage. If they're going to be costing you more money in revision time, and new sets of parts or whatever, or new files that have got to go out, and that basically, you know, you're ditching sets of parts all the time. If every time there's a load of revisions that you can't just put in manually, you are losing more money than you are earning in fees. So that composer is going to start bankrupting you, and you know you're going to have words with them about doing that. But you know, these are things we have to manage, and that's evolving now. I think how you track those changes. I personally, I find it really hard when the composers make the changes on the file, and you've got to start comparing files, and they're not always meticulous about highlighting where they've changed things. We've had this problem quite a lot recently. It involves you in a lot of extra work in double checking things from file to file. And I just think, well, actually, can I just send you a score, and can you mark up on paper what you have changed on this score? And then your new file will show the differences, because that is more, you know, that is just easier. And I can see that you've really intended that change. If you've accidentally hit something and you've changed something further on the score, you know, once things are on a file, you know, is it the computer error, i.e. is it someone's bashed the wrong key, or did you mean that change? It's just much more dangerous than if you mark up something that was right at one point, and then we have a paper record of things. You know, and the younger, you know, sort of lots of the younger generation don't want to do that because they've never used paper in that way. But to me, it's a record of what was there before and what the changes are, so you can go back and see if something's gone wrong. When once files are changed, you know, everything is those things are invisible. Really difficult, terrifying, in fact.
Elaine, in Sibelius, I mean, I understand hand marked score is always the greatest. I mean, a marked up score is the greatest. But in Sibelius, you can there's the highlight feature, which if used properly and consistently is great.
Yeah,
but
actually, yes, you're right. Yeah.
There's also compare versions where you can take two.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And you'll get not only a highlight, but you get a list. And then you could actually send that list to your composer to verify and say, yes, 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 no, yes. And there, you know, so there are tools already existing within Sibelius to do some of that tracking work for you. You know, I think, I'm not sure, Matt, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you might have been asking about Sibelius using versions and being able to
No, I'm actually more about things like I love using Google Sheets to have everybody who needs to make changes, like the proofers and everybody, like just put it on a list, and then we can go through and check off the list rather than having to dig through the score. But
there are lots of methods. That's a great method. I mean, a shared document, but just, you know, but just to highlight for the group that Sibelius does have some features which really, if used consistently, can do a lot of the heavy lifting that we used to have to do with a red pencil, you know. Anyway.
Yeah.
There's also software management programs like SVN where you have to update and commit. When you commit, it gives you the opportunity to put in comments.
Do we want to give Alexander a shot here?
Yeah.
What are the situations, if any, where the use of proportional spacing would be justified? I know, it's a bit of a left turn. I know.
No. Well, yeah. Well, if that's the piece you want to write.
Because the thing is, usually in most of the cases where someone comes to me with a proportional score, my first reaction is, should we really do that? Is it really wise to do that?
Well,
why are you doing that?
Yes,
Should we do it another way? And that's my ironically, I am involved in a project where we are using for very specific reasons. We're using proportional spacing extensively. So on a more general level, I would like your opinion. When would it be justified?
Yeah. Oh, golly. If it's especially for one, or I think for a very small number of musicians, where you have each other's parts cued and where there is an interaction between the voices or instruments, and they can see what each other are doing, and where the durations or the relationship between how they play things means that they can see that, and it definitely doesn't want to be measured because, for instance, it would be different each time. Yeah, so sort of like some of the late Messiaen scores, almost, where very spaced.
Say so?
Yeah, where if you've got a very long note, it takes up half the line.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. Well, I can't think of any offhand, but you might have an example of something that you think would be useful. To me, it's a complete anathema. It's completely the opposite aesthetic to what I advocate in my book, as you'll know.
I would think so.
Yeah. So yeah, I just I wouldn't use it. I find the scores like the kind of Messiaen where they've done that. The argument for that is that if you've got something that's really sort of monumental and very long, then you have this hugely long bar. In other words, you try to make the music on the page look like it sounds. To me, that just spells danger. Once you start doing that, you get into all sorts of dichotomies about what to do. So yeah, I can't think of anywhere where I've actually done that.
There was a question from Cameron that's interesting. Coming from a university student, how would you recommend going about getting involved in the world of copying and engraving today? Is the best approach to just freelance for composers as much as possible? Question mark.
Yes, yes, I would say so. Because it's, I mean, unfortunately, especially now, you know, it's really hard. It's really hard for us to provide work to freelancers, never mind for poor people who are really talented and wanting to start off. There's just not very much work around. But persevere with it. I think if you're interested in it, get doing typesetting and get sending it to composers and to publishers, and you know, try to get some work, so that you can start to really get to know the business and get in there. You find out who needs help. Look at self-published composers who really could do with some help, and offer to do some work for them, and see where that leads.
So should we go around the panel and just ask everybody another question, and then we'll see where we're at. Russ, do you want to start? And
I'm good. I think we're approaching the 3-hour mark.
Yeah, Emily.
I think this has been incredible. I'm just scanning. I was scanning the chat to see if there are other questions. I didn't get.
Well, there's Frank. Yeah, Frank's got a question. Hello, Frank. Yeah,
go ahead, Frank.
Has a question.
Hi,
hello,
Elaine.
hi, Frank.
Great to see you again. It's already nearly 3 years. Unbelievable since we met.
Yep.
Yeah. I have a very weird question. Mostly you print everything on A4 in the European area. Does it somehow happen to you still sometimes that you have to prepare parts on B4?
Yes.
Or is this totally out?
Yes, I mean, we try, a lot of our scores now, we try to print bigger than A4, so more like the American 12:9, the traditional music size, 12:9 inches. So we do try to do things where we can, where the printing costs have come down now, whereas we used to have to do A4 scores. We do them slightly bigger, slightly wider, so that you've got that extra width, and it's much more of a part size. And when we're producing orchestral parts, again, I want them bigger than A4. A4 is a horrible size for a part with a lot of orchestral music on it. So yes, we print as big as B4. When we got a complicated piece, a lot of our older repertoire was, all the hand copied stuff was formatted for B4. It's bigger on the stand, bigger, bolder. Not everybody likes it. If it's in a pit, it may be a little bit too big, but it gives you a chance to increase the size of the music a bit from A4. So we'll have the proofs at A4, but then we'll instruct our higher library to make up the parts at a slightly bigger size. And we have two sizes. One is B4, one's an intermediary size, so that it can just be it can breathe a little bit more on a page and have a decent margin.
Well, sometimes if you have a longer passage, it's just impossible to implement proper page turns, which has never been a problem for string players before the pandemic. But now each one has its own desk, and the left player just can't turn it.
Exactly. I still like to avoid them. I still like to avoid having half the section to go out for the turns as well. I mean, I always think that's not an excuse. And especially with Sibelius and so on, you can input your whole part, and then you can see where the decent page turns are, and then you can jolly well reformat the part properly, so that you haven't got half the players turning when everyone else is playing. There's often in pieces there are other places you can turn, so you do that extra work, and you don't have that kerfuffle in your really, really pianissimo passage of half the section turning the page, making a noise. So yeah, there's often ways of avoiding that.
But Ross, do you have any thoughts before you conclude this? And that you want to...
Just a big thank you to Elaine and everybody that's contributed. It's really been, and is this our fourth one of these? I think this has been extraordinary. Fourth one, yeah. So can't say thank you enough. I hope we get to meet in person sometime. I get to go to London, or at least I used to be able to. So next time I'm over there, we'll try and look you up. I'm good friends with Jill Streater, and she's helped me immensely many times. So thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
How about you, Liz? What do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I echo everybody here in thanking Elaine. This has been just wonderful. How often do we get to meet and talk to an author of this stature of a book like this? And so I think this is really special. And again, I encourage everybody to save your money and buy the book if you don't have it. And I realize that, I realize it's an investment, but of all the books, we talk about orchestration books and other arranging books and guides and so forth. And they're all important, but this subject is really important, I feel, for everyone, whether you're the composer, whether you're an arranger, orchestrator, or a copyist. This is such important fundamental information for communicating your music again. So that's kind of my final thought, that this should be on everybody's shelf,
And oh, that's great. Yeah.
And thank you, Elaine.
Well, thanks, Liz, for bringing the book to the top of our attention in the last few webinars on your list. And we haven't heard a whole lot from Jill today. How are you doing, Jill?
I'm fine. I'm actually quite tired, so I've been listening in and absorbing everything. It's been fantastic. Thank you, Elaine, and I concur. Buy the book. Buy the book. I'm going to finish with a funny little question. Once it was published, did you find any little tiny, weeny errors in it?
Yeah, there were tiny ones, but they were really, really small. There was a couple of translation. Yeah, I'd spelt a couple of things wrong there was a French phrase, and then there was a German title, and I'd got a wrong vowel in a couple of them. There was very, very little. It was interesting. There was a composer who took the book and sort of immediately bought it, and within a week of publication had written me a 2 or 3 page email with all the things that he said that were wrong in it.
Oh.
I mean, he was trying to be helpful, but I'm pleased to say every single one of them was a matter of opinion. And it's, where I recommend one thing and he would have done something else that I don't mention. I don't always mention absolutely every way of doing everything, especially if I don't recommend it. And they were all valid points, and I did thank him very much, but I was really pleased that, in fact, I didn't feel they were errors. Yeah, there are some that there are some slight matter of course, you've got a matter of opinions, and where is a rule a house style, and so on. And it's very difficult to distinguish that in the book without making it look terribly erudite and very messy. So we decided not to do that. But that was what we did. We found there were a couple of tiny grammatical errors, or there was one place where I've said the opposite of what I should have said. But then the music example says the right thing, so you don't even notice it. And that was the whole intention of the book, is that you just learn by looking at the examples. And so when Jens and Anna were doing the German edition, and they were picking over every single word, and there were 1 or 2 things that didn't quite, or what does this mean? And you think, well, it doesn't really mean anything, take it out. So there were 1 or 2 things, so that's good. So I did have a few corrections, which means that in all of these 10 impressions, I think there was twice I've actually gone back and changed a tiny bit of text, but that's all. And that's a credit to basically everyone I played to read all the proofs, and the fact that, of course, being a proofreader, one is just went through and proof after proof and checked it.
I've had a good idea, everybody. If you want this book, get it to be bought for your birthday or for Christmas.
Oh yeah, yeah. Lots of people have. Lots of people have. Yeah.
I think Elaine, I mean, Emily was mentioning that she has the Kindle version on.
Yeah, no, that's yes. I think I'm very pleased with the with the ebook, the Kindle. I asked Faber and Faber ages ago if we could, because they do these conversions, and it took a while for them to get it right, so that the image of the music examples would come out really clearly. Because first of all, they did it in a way that it didn't, and I said no. The key to this book is the music examples have got to have fantastic definition, however small your device is. And I mean, I've had students with it on their phone, and it's fantastic. They can still read it perfectly all right. I know that from the questions that they've been asking me about it, and it's terrific because for a start, it doesn't, it costs a quarter of the price, and you don't have to carry 2.4 kilos around with you. So, means you can have it on any device you like as well. So I'm all for that.
Well, Annie's got her camera on, so do you want to go full circle and finish up with Annie saying anything? Annie, do you have anything to chip in?
Right, got my microphone on, I've got the camera on, I've got it right.
Hey, I've got the camera on.
Yes, I completely messed up all that, didn't I? I beg your pardon. Oh dear. No, I think what you've done is absolutely brilliant. I mean, brilliant how dedicated you've been and how thorough. It's so needed, this book. There's nothing out there at all, and it's I just absolutely congratulate you. It's brilliant.
Well, it was, I think, yes, being in the right place at the right time, having the opportunity to do it, and persuading Faber that I could do it, and I don't think they ever thought I would finish it, but I was grimly determined that I would. But I mean, I knew I needed to stay at Faber, that they would have jacked in the whole idea as an absolute commercial disaster if I'd not stayed there. I mean, they were very worried about the printing costs and whether we'd ever sell more than 3 copies. I mean, originally the print run was going to be 1,500 copies because they were terrified they would never ever sell those and they'd be stuck with them in the warehouse. Because, what was the market going to be? This was a sort of book for absolute anoraks. And who on earth was going to buy this? There was hardly any copyists left in the world. Who on earth would want a book? And in fact, of course, when I first started it was when software, when Finale, Score, and Sibelius were all being used, and I had reactions from people at music college saying, "Well, why do we need this book now?" And of course, you will all have heard that. Well, why do we need anyone telling us this? Now we've got the software which does everything for us.
But it doesn't, does it? It doesn't.
Well, of course, we know it doesn't. Of course, it was a few years later everyone realised that actually you needed it more than ever, because how were you going to know that the software was doing anything right?
Yeah, no, I just highly commend. I just think it's absolutely brilliant. The tenacity and the everything, just brilliant. Well done. Yeah, it's an absolute Bible, isn't it? It's brilliant. Well done.
Yeah, bravo.
My favorite moment now for the day after all of this fantastic wisdom is learning the term anorak in your usage. It's my new favorite. I'm going to bring it over here as a
very English. In fact, one of my editors suggested, for my particularly erudite points, that we should have an anorak symbol that you put in the margin. Like beam angles, for instance. You'd have an anorak sign.
That's fantastic. Yeah. We can annotate. We can each annotate our own copy.
Yeah, exactly. There should have been a sort of pack of stickers that you could stick them on your favorite anorak. Where to put your Ossia sign. Above or below the stage. This sort of thing. Really important points in life.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed getting to know you through this presentation, and I'm so impressed with the amount of consideration that you put into everything. I mean, you've tried to manage many points of view on a subject that could have arguments for eternity.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, and of course that's what you find is that's what we all know. When you ask a musician what they want, the next person will say something different.
Absolutely.
And of course that was the fascinating thing about doing research, was that you think you know the answer from having read all the other notation books ever written and all the orchestration books, and then you go and ask a player and they want something different, and then you go and ask two other players you get three different opinions, and then I think, crumbs, now what do I write? So then you go and ask a fourth player, and they are all players who've studied in the same city, in my case mostly London trained players, and they'll all have different interpretations. When you want to talk about string techniques, it depends who they've been taught by. What do they understand by this slur and that dot? And what do they understand by staccato, wedge, and how do you use it in these different contexts? So in the end of the day, you put down something, so at least even if people don't agree with you, they know they've got to think about it. There's no excuse for just writing something just because you always have. You've got to be responsible for everything you write, and that's obviously the thing we all want everybody to be.
Right.
I think we should really all turn our cameras on and give you a huge applause.
Yes.
Very kind.
Seriously, I mean, it just
Yay.
So, what do you think, Milton?
Well, we could go another 3 hours if we want.
Yeah. No, we can make that another event. Right, Elaine?
Yeah, fine by me.
Part two. I'm all for it.
All right.
Part two. This is part 4 of, music copyists getting together and sharing their thoughts and everything. Now we've got you. So
you've got that whole list of other agenda items now.
Yeah.
That you didn't quite get around to
Those agenda items have been there for some time.
And they'll be there.
They'll be there for some time. Yeah.
I'm just going to ask you a quick question just relating to the harp. Do you find that the input you've had from whatever research you've done with harpists, that they tell you to leave the pedal graphs and pedal markings off?
Oh, some of them do, but mostly they say put them in, because I said that's what I want to say to composers, to work out. In other words, to force the composer to work out that things work. And that, for instance, I had a composer not that long ago who had a pause bar between two very, very quiet chords, and he had 7 harp changes, pedal changes, all of the pedals to be changed in a silence, in a piece for 4 players. So you'd be playing it in a small hall, and so you'd get this thunderous clatter between 2 very still, quiet chords. Now, if you don't write, he hadn't written them in, so I wrote them in and said, okay, what are you going to do about this? So he hadn't thought of that. So I think people should, and yes, I know that some of them say don't put that in, but actually, well, most of them, people, they can wipe them out themselves, but some of them just, that everyone does it differently. But I do put them in. Sometimes I now don't put them in a score, I put them in a part. And then I think, well, players tend to, they copy the part, they Xerox the part themselves, and then they keep their own part, because obviously once they've worked it out, so I don't always see what they've done. But no, I must say, writing for the harp was one of the great revelations when I came to do the research, because there was nothing much in any books that I'd seen that told me much about how you really should write for the harp. In other words, don't write a piano part.
Right, it looks like piano music, but we only have the 4 fingers on each hand.
Yeah, and you cross over in different ways, and I can't tell which way you're going to play with which hand, because you can do things either way. It's not.
That's right.
And a lot of composers are thinking pianistically, and they're writing these elaborate harp parts, which then become totally illegible to you because notes are in the wrong places on the stage. So I've had things thrown back to me. That's when I like it, when the players complain, because then that's what I've learned. Right. You learn from that.
So I guess we're probably wrapping it up right now. Do you think, Milton, I should give a couple little thoughts?
Go ahead. Yes, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. So everybody, Elaine, what a gift you've been to all of us today. And I really do hope we'll have a part 2 with you. And again, everybody should get your book, Behind the Bars, whether it be in a, format on your iPad, what do you call it? Or the hard copy, but everybody should have your book. I got to get your book, And I also want to thank, as we have had, this is our 4th, webinar with music copyists writing the music, with Emily Grishman and Jill Streater and Liz Finch and Russ Anixter and Ross deRoche. You are a family for us, and you bring us together with all the questions that need to be answered. And now we have Elaine. She's part of this family. So we're definitely going to do another event with Elaine. I just thank you all for just being here again today. And needless to say, we had Chuck Fernandez, who was initially welcoming everybody by bringing you in on the Zoom, and then he had to go to teach. So now Milton, our magnificent producer for all of our events, which have been over a year now, and I just don't know how his mind just keeps going and going and going and going. So I thank you. I thank all of you for today, and just please know how much we would love to have you all become members of ASMAC. And so many of the videos that we have now from our Zooms, which are only available by being a member, and then you can see everything as we get it posted up on our website. That's one of the pluses, you can go back. Please save the chat from today. There's a wealth of information there, wonderful questions that were asked and answered by other people that were reading the chat. Consider joining us. You can join at different levels, and whether you're a student, whether you want to be an associate, it's not all one set price. And then if you have a moment, please like us on Facebook and invite your friends to like us, and sign up for our Twitter and Instagram feeds. And the icons are in the upper right top of our website. And what else can I tell you? That we have many more events coming. Just, log on to www.asmac.org, check our calendar. And if you feel so inclined and want to give a little donation, that's great, because we've been bringing all these events to you. I think 90% of them have been for free. And we are expanding, we are growing, and we have many, many more things that we want to do going forward in the future. So we want to, we're not doing big fundraisers. So if you feel so inclined, but it's not required. If you feel like you want to donate $5, $10 on our website, that would be great. I just can't thank you all enough for today. It's just been fantastic. I always say at the end of each event is to please stay well, stay safe, keep a smile in your heart, and times are getting better. I just feel it, and I know we're all feeling it, and that we are one big family because we get together once or twice a week now for the past year. And Elaine, again, huge gratitude to you for all that you've given to us. You are so articulate. You're just an amazing, amazing person. And I'm so grateful to have been able to be free to be here with all of you today. Milton, I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you have anything you want to
say? Let's give Elaine a chance to say goodbye or say anything you want to say. We'll hang out.
Well, thank you. It's just been a huge pleasure. And it having watched the previous webinars too, it's, I'm just sort of feeling I'm being part of this family. Well, we're all doing this, we all have the same aims. We're all doing the same thing. We're all passionately caring about all of this.
Yes.
And it's just terrific to share that. I mean, most of us, especially anyone who's freelance, is in a very isolated position. You rarely get to talk to other people who are doing the same thing. And I know when I was freelance, it was a bit like that. You rarely got to get out of the house. Never mind the fact that there's a pandemic, but you were hardly ever meeting anyone else. And here you are sharing ideas, now that we have the technology to do that. And it's terrific to be part of that.
Yeah.
So thank you for thanking me, for welcoming me, given me such a fantastic welcome, and I totally appreciate that. And it's just wonderful to talk about my favorite subject, because I can talk about it forever, but so can you all, I think, as well, which is great.
Yeah, we
Thank you.
live it, we breathe it.
Yeah, we have.
Exactly. Yeah. So thank you very much.
It's our pleasure, and we look forward to part 2 with you.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Part 5, part 2/part 2, right?
Okay.
Take care.
Right.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you.
Right.
Thank
We'll
you.
take
Nice
it out
to see
now.
everyone.
Yep.
Thank you all. Elaine,
Thank
this
you.
was spectacular.
See y'all next time.
See you next time.
Okay.
Bye, Emily.
Thank you.
Save the
Right.
chat, everybody.
Okay.
See you, Russ.
Will do.
Bye,
Bye,
guys.
Russ.
Bye.
Thanks, Milton, for everything.
All right.
Yeah, bye, Milton. Bye, Liz.
Say goodnight. Say goodnight.
Good night,
We all-
John.
There you
Good
go.
night, Avita.
Okay.
Bye,
All right.
Milton.
Jonathan, you say goodnight.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's a face of joy. Oh my God, I love Jonathan.